Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and here, every whisper hides a mystery. These Miss Marple stories are my own creations, written just for you. So lean in and let the clues begin. In the quiet village of Chipping Cleghorn, a chilling newspaper ad announces a murder at Letitia Blacklock's home, sparking curiosity and dread. As guests gather, a gunman bursts in, shots ring out, and a man lies dead. But is it a failed robbery or something sinister? When poison and strangulation claim more lives, Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster, unravels a web of deception. The woman known as Letitia is Charlotte, hiding a secret identity to claim a fortune, orchestrating a deadly scheme that unravels through betrayals and hidden scars. Chapter 1. The Curious Advertisement. In the pleasant little village of Chipping Cleghorn, where the cottages clustered around the duck pond and the church spire pointed heavenward like an admonitory finger, the arrival of the local Gazette each Friday morning was an event of mild but dependable interest. It carried notices of forthcoming jumble sales, appeals for the restoration of the organ fund, and occasional advertisements for domestic help or second-hand gardening tools. On this particular Friday in October, however, the personal column contained an item that caused more than one reader to pause over their breakfast toast and raise an eyebrow in surprise. The advertisement read, "A murder is announced and will take place on Friday, October 29th, at Little Paddocks at 6:30 p.m. Friends, please accept this, the only intimation." Little Paddocks stood at the end of the village, a solid Georgian house with white-painted sash windows and a well-kept gravel drive bordered by laurels. Its owner, Miss Letitia Blacklock, a woman of about 60 with a firm chin and alert gray eyes, unfolded the paper in the sunny morning room and scanned the columns with her customary efficiency. She had lived there for some years now, ever since the war, and was known in the village as a sensible, capable person who managed her small estate with quiet authority and contributed generously to local causes. Her eye fell upon the curious notice. She read it once, then again, her brows drawing together in faint perplexity. "How very odd," she murmured. From the other side of the table, her companion, Miss Dora Bunner, known to all as Bunny, looked up from buttering her toast. Bunny was a faded, fluttery creature, a school friend from long ago who had fallen on hard times and been invited to make her home at Little Paddocks. She peered through her pince-nez, her thin face alight with curiosity. "What is it, Letty?" "Something in the paper? Not another rise in the price of coal, I hope. It's shocking how everything costs these days." Miss Blacklock passed the Gazette across. "Look at that, Bunny." In the personals, Bunny read it aloud, her voice rising in pitch with each word. "A murder is announced at Little Paddocks." "Why, that's here, our house." "Oh, Letty, what can it mean? It's not one of your jokes, is it? You know I'm no good at riddles." "Of course not," said Miss Blacklock briskly. "I haven't the faintest idea who put it in. Probably some silly prank. Perhaps one of the young people thinking it's amusing, though I can't imagine why they'd choose us." Bunny's eyes widened. "But a murder? It sounds so dreadful. Do you think we ought to tell the police? Or perhaps it's a mistake in the printing. Maybe they meant a meeting or a musical evening." Miss Blacklock smiled indulgently. "I doubt it. No, Bunny, we'll say nothing for now. If anyone turns up this evening, we'll soon find out what it's about. In the meantime, let's not make a fuss." But in a village like Chipping Cleghorn, such an item could hardly pass unnoticed. At Dias Hall, a rambling Victorian pile half a mile away, Colonel Archie Easterbrook, retired from the Indian Army, was enjoying his kedgeree when his wife, Laura, drew his attention to it. Mrs. Easterbrook was a handsome woman with a penchant for dramatic hats and a voice that carried across rooms. "Archie, listen to this. A murder is announced at Letty Blacklock's place. What on earth can it be? Some sort of charade party, do you think?" The colonel harumphed, stroking his mustache. "Damned peculiar, if you ask me. Blacklock's a sensible woman, not the type for tomfoolery. Still, might be worth popping over. Haven't seen her since the Red Cross fete." "I suppose we could," said Mrs. Easterbrook thoughtfully. "It does say, 'Friends, please accept this,' and we are neighbors after all." Further along the lane, at the Boulders, a pair of converted cottages now occupied by two middle-aged ladies of robust independence, the advertisement provoked a different reaction. Miss Amy Murgatroyd, plump and amiable, with a shock of gray hair that always looked windswept, read it out to her companion over their porridge. "Hinch, did you see this? A murder at Little Paddock's tonight. Sounds thrilling." Miss Hinchcliffe, taller and more angular, with a stride like a man's and hands calloused from tending her small holding of pigs and poultry, snorted. "Thrilling? Nonsense. Probably one of those murder games the idle set play, clues and alibis and all that rot. Still, Blacklock's all right. We might stroll over after feeding the hens. Could be a laugh." Miss Murgatroyd beamed. "Oh, yes. I do love a bit of excitement. Life's so quiet here since the war." At the vicarage, the Reverend Julian Harmon was deep in his sermon notes when his wife, Diana, known to everyone as Bunch for her round cheeks and cheerful disposition, burst in waving the Gazette. "Julian, have you seen this? A murder announced at Letty Blacklock's. What do you make of it?" The vicar adjusted his spectacles. "Extraordinary. Not in very good taste if it's a joke. Murder's no laughing matter." Bunch perched on the arm of his chair. "But don't you think we should go, just to see? After all, it might be something charitable, a mock trial for funds or whatnot." "I suppose," said the vicar doubtfully, "if it's not intrusive. Miss Blacklock is a pillar of the parish committee." By midday, the news had filtered through the village shops and over garden walls. The grocer's wife mentioned it to the postman, who carried it to the blacksmith, and soon half of Chipping Cleghorn was buzzing with speculation. Was it a new-fangled party game? A theatrical stunt? Or, whispered with a thrill, something more sinister? No one, it seemed, had placed the advertisement themselves, and inquiries at the Gazette office in nearby Medmenham Wells revealed only that it had been posted anonymously with the correct fee enclosed. As the afternoon wore on, a subtle consensus formed. One couldn't very well ignore such an invitation, even if unbidden. And so, as the October sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lanes, several pairs of feet turned toward Little Paddocks, drawn by that most irresistible of lures, curiosity. Chapter 2. Gathering Shadows. As the afternoon light began to wane on that fateful Friday, October 29th, the village of Chipping Cleghorn seemed to hold its breath. The sun dipped behind the line of elms that bordered the common, casting elongated shadows that stretched like fingers across the lanes and fields. A chill crept into the air, the kind that heralded the approach of winter, and with it came a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sense of expectancy that hung over the rooftops like mist rising from the duck pond. Little Paddocks, with its neat facade and glowing windows, stood as a beacon at the end of the village, drawing the curious like moths to a flame. Inside the house, Miss Letitia Blacklock moved with her usual composed efficiency, directing Mitzi, the cook, to prepare extra trays of tea and sandwiches. Mitzi, a dark-haired woman from some unspecified Central European country ravaged by the war, muttered under her breath as she sliced cucumber and ham. Her accent was thick, her manner dramatic. She had arrived at Little Paddocks 2 years earlier via a refugee agency, and though her cooking was excellent, rich goulashes and delicate pastries that evoked pre-war opulence, her temperament was a trial. "This is madness, Miss Blacklock," she declared, waving a knife for emphasis. "Strangers coming to the house because of some stupid newspaper joke. In my country, we would lock the doors and call the police. But here, in England, you make tea." Letitia smiled faintly, adjusting a vase of late blooming chrysanthemums on the hall table. "It's probably nothing, Mitzi, a bit of harmless fun. And if people do turn up, we can't very well turn them away at the door. That wouldn't be neighborly." Mitzi snorted. "Neighborly? In my country, neighbors come with guns or secrets. Here, they come with smiles and expect cake." She retreated to the kitchen, slamming cupboards with unnecessary force. Upstairs, in the guest rooms, Patrick and Julia Simmons were preparing for the evening. They were Letitia's cousins, or rather the children of a cousin, down from London for what Patrick called a spot of country air. Patrick, a handsome young man in his mid-20s with wavy dark hair and a disarming grin, lounged against the door frame of Julia's room, watching her apply lipstick in the mirror. "I say, Ju, this could be ripping fun. A murder announced. Who knows what might happen? Perhaps it's Aunt Letty's way of livening things up." Julia, a year older than her brother, with sleek blonde hair and the bored expression of a city sophisticate, capped her lipstick and turned to him. "Don't be absurd, Pat. Aunt Letty's the last person to play games like that. She's as straight as a die. Probably some village idiot's idea of a joke. Still, it beats another evening of bridge with the vicar." She smoothed her dress, a smart wool number from Harrods, and glanced out the window. "Look, here come the first arrivals. That must be the Easterbrooks, Colonel Blimp and his hatchet-faced wife." Down below, indeed, Colonel and Mrs. Easterbrook were crunching up the gravel drive. The Colonel, a portly figure in tweeds, with a ruddy face and a bristling mustache that spoke of years in the Punjab, carried himself with military precision. His wife, Laura, taller and more angular, wore a feathered hat that bobbed as she walked, her voice already carrying ahead of them. "Archie, do slow down. I don't want to arrive out of breath. And remember, if it's a party, we mustn't stay too long. I've that committee meeting tomorrow." "Nonsense, my dear," boomed the Colonel. "A spot of excitement's just the ticket. Haven't had a proper do since the armistice ball." He rapped smartly on the door with his walking stick. Letitia opened it herself, her face lighting up with a welcoming smile that masked any inner reservations. "Colonel Easterbrook, Mrs. Easterbrook, how kind of you to come. Though I must confess I'm as much in the dark as anyone about this peculiar announcement." The Colonel chuckled, stepping inside and handing his hat to Dora Bunner, who had fluttered up behind Letitia like a moth. "Dark, eh? Well, that's fitting for a murder mystery. Perhaps it's one of those American games, Clue or whatnot. I remember in Simla, we had a fellow who staged mock trials for amusement." Mrs. Easterbrook nodded vigorously, her hat feathers quivering. "Yes, Quite. Though I do hope it's not too vulgar. One hears such stories about modern entertainments. She glanced around the hall, noting the polished oak floors and the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. Your house is looking lovely, Letty. Those chrysanthemums. From your garden? As they moved into the drawing room, a spacious chamber with chintz-covered armchairs and a roaring fire in the grate, more guests began to arrive. Next came Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd from the Boulders. Miss Hinchcliffe strode up the path, with her characteristic vigor, her boots muddy from the farm, a no-nonsense woman in breeches and a worn jacket, her short-cropped hair graying at the temples. Beside her trotted Miss Murgatroyd, softer and rounder, with a woolen scarf wound multiple times around her neck and a perpetual air of mild astonishment. "Hello, Blacklock," said Miss Hinchcliffe bluntly, shaking Letitia's hand with a grip like iron. "Heard about the ad. Thought we'd pop in, see if it's worth the fuss. Murgatroyd here was all agog." Miss Murgatroyd beamed, her cheeks pink from the walk. "Oh, yes. It's so exciting, isn't it? Like something out of a novel. Do you think there'll be clues? Or actors?" She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I once went to a murder dinner in London, frightfully thrilling, though the soup was cold." Letitia ushered them in, suppressing a sigh. The drawing room was filling up now, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and perfume. Patrick descended the stairs with his easy grace, charming the ladies with compliments, while Julia followed, lighting a cigarette and surveying the scene with detached amusement. "Quite the turnout," she murmured to her brother. "Aunt Letty must be thrilled, not?" Dora Bunner, ever the enthusiastic hostess, darted about with trays of sherry and biscuits. "Isn't this fun, Letty?" "Just like old times. Remember our school theatricals? Though we never did a murder. Oh, here's Mrs. Harmon." Bunch Harmon, the vicar's wife, arrived breathless, her round face flushed under a sensible hat. "Letty, I hope we're not intruding. Julian couldn't come. Sermon to write, but he sends his regards. We saw the ad and thought, well, perhaps it's a fundraiser or something. The organ fund is desperate, you know." Letitia laughed, a light, controlled sound. "If it raises a penny for the organ, it'll be more than I expected. Do come in, Bunch. Tea's just ready." As Bunch settled into an armchair, chatting animatedly with Mrs. Easterbrook about the rising cost of coal, another figure slipped quietly through the door. Philippa Hames, a slender young widow with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, worked as a gardener at Dias Hall and lodged in the village. She was not one for social gatherings, preferring the solitude of her potting shed, but curiosity had drawn her here. "Miss Blacklock," she said softly, her voice low and cultured. "I saw the notice. I didn't mean to impose, but—" "Nonsense, Philippa," said Letitia warmly. "You're most welcome. Help yourself to a sandwich. Mitzi's outdone herself." Philippa nodded gratefully, taking a seat in the corner and observing the room with quiet eyes. She had come to Chipping Cleghorn after her husband's death in the war, seeking work to support herself and her young son, who was away at school. The villagers found her reserved, almost mysterious, but Letitia had taken a liking to her, occasionally inviting her for tea. The clock on the mantel ticked onward, its hands inching, toward 6:30. The room hummed with conversation, a babel of voices rising and falling like waves. Colonel Easterbrook held court by the fire, regaling Patrick with tales of tiger hunts in India. Shot the blighter clean through the eye? Never forget it. Steady nerve. That's the key, young man. Patrick nodded enthusiastically. Sounds dashed exciting, sir. Wish I'd seen some action like that. The war was all mud and waiting for me. Julia, perched on the arm of a sofa, exchanged glances with Miss Murgatroyd. Tell me, she said in her drawling voice, what do you make of all this? Aunt Letty says it's a hoax, but who would go to such trouble? Miss Murgatroyd leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. Oh, I think it's deliberate. Perhaps a surprise party. Or maybe, don't laugh, a real mystery. Hinch says I'm fanciful, but one reads such things in the papers. Miss Hinchcliffe, overhearing, grunted. Fanciful's right. More likely some lad from the pub having a lark. Still, Blacklock, you've got a houseful now. Better than rattling around alone. Letitia, circulating with the teapot, paused to refill cups. Alone? With Bunny and the Simmonses and Mitzi? Hardly. But yes, it's nice to have company. Her gaze flickered to the window, where the twilight had deepened to a velvety blue. Outside, the garden lay shrouded in shadow, the laurels rustling faintly in the breeze. In the kitchen, Mitzi paused in her labors, peering out the back door. She had a habit of imagining perils, ghosts of her war-torn past, perhaps, and tonight the darkness seemed thicker than usual. Foolishness, she muttered, crossing herself before returning to her pots. Back in the drawing room, Dora Bunner was in her element, flitting from group to group like a faded butterfly. Colonel, more sherry? Philippa, dear, try the cucumber, fresh from the greenhouse. Oh, Letty, this is just like that party we had in '39, before everything changed. Remember? With the charades? Letitia nodded, her smile a touch strained. Yes, Bunny. Though I hope this doesn't turn into charades. She glanced again at the clock. 6:20 now. The anticipation was palpable, a undercurrent beneath the chatter. What if no one had placed the ad? What if it was all a mistake? But the guests were here, and the evening must proceed. Suddenly, the doorbell rang again. Letitia excused herself and went to answer it. On the step stood Edmund Swettenham, a young man from the village, son of the local widow, Mrs. Swettenham. He was a writer, or aspired to be, with intense eyes and a mop of unruly hair. Miss Blacklock, he said, a trifle awkwardly. Mother saw the ad and insisted I come. She thought it might be, well, something literary. A reading, perhaps? Letitia chuckled. If it is, it's news to me. Do come in, Edmund. Your mother's well? As ever, he replied, stepping inside. Edmund was known for his socialist leanings and impassioned letters to the local paper, which often ruffled feathers among the more conservative villagers. He nodded to the others, taking a seat near Philippa, with whom he shared a tentative friendship. They had discussed books once or twice in the village shop. The room was crowded now, the air warm from the fire and the press of bodies. Conversation flowed in eddies, Mrs. Easterbrook lamenting the servant problem, Bunch Harmon sharing a recipe for scones, Miss Hinchcliffe debating pig breeds with the Colonel. Patrick flirted mildly with Julia, who rolled her eyes but smiled. Dora Bunner, tireless, passed around plates of cake, her face alight with pleasure. It's wonderful, isn't it, all these people? Who would have thought a little ad could bring such a gathering? Letitia, standing by the window, felt a momentary unease. The garden beyond was invisible now, swallowed by night. She shook it off, silly to be jumpy over nothing. Yes, Bunny, she said, quite wonderful. As the minutes ticked by, the talk turned inevitably to the advertisement itself. Who do you suppose placed it? asked Mrs. Easterbrook, her voice cutting through the hum. "Not you, Letty, surely." "Absolutely not," Letitia assured her. "I was as surprised as anyone." "Perhaps a secret admirer," suggested Patrick with a wink, "or a rival for the inheritance, making a dramatic entrance." Julia shot him a warning look. "Don't be flippant, Pat. Aunt Letty's inheritance is no joke." The room fell momentarily quiet at that. It was common knowledge in the village that Letitia Blacklock was heiress to a considerable fortune from the late Randall Godler, a financier who had died years ago. His widow, Belle, was still alive, but frail, living abroad, and upon her death the money would come to Letitia. There were clauses about distant relatives if Letitia predeceased, but no one dwelt on that. Colonel Easterbrook cleared his throat. "Well, whatever it is, it's nearly time. Clock says 6:25. Everyone ready for the big reveal?" Laughter rippled around the room, nervous and expectant. Miss Murgatroyd clasped her hands. "Oh, I do hope it's something fun." Philippa Hames, silent until now, spoke softly. "Or perhaps it's nothing at all, just a way to bring us together." Edmund Swettenham nodded. "Community and curiosity. There's a story in that." Mitzi appeared at the door, bearing a fresh pot of tea, her face set in lines of disapproval. "More tea? Or shall I prepare for the ghosts?" Letitia took the pot. "Thank you, Mitzi. That will be all for now." As the cook withdrew, the clock struck the half-hour. 6:30. All eyes turned to Letitia, then to the windows, the door. The room held its collective breath. Outside, in the enveloping darkness, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the laurels. Clad in a dark coat, hat pulled low, the intruder moved stealthily toward the French windows of the drawing room. In one gloved hand gleamed the barrel of a revolver. The figure paused, listening to the murmur of voices within, then reached for the handle. Inside, oblivious, the gathering waited, but the evening's drama was only beginning. Chapter 3. The Shot in the Dark. The drawing room of Little Paddocks was a tableau of warmth and conviviality as the clock struck 6:30 on that chilly October evening. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the chintz curtains and polished furniture. The gathered guests, Colonel and Mrs. Easterbrook, Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd, Bunch Harmon, Philippa Hames, Edmund Swettenham, and the Simmons cousins, Patrick and Julia, sipped tea or sherry, their voices weaving a tapestry of light chatter and suppressed anticipation. Miss Letitia Blacklock, the epitome of composed hospitality, stood near the fireplace, exchanging pleasantries with Bunch Harmon about the vicarage garden. Dora Bunner, her friend and companion, flitted about with a tray of sandwiches, her faded blue eyes alight with the thrill of an unexpected party. Yet beneath the surface of this cozy scene, a current of unease ran, stirred by the mysterious advertisement that had drawn them all here. A murder is announced and will take place on Friday, October 29th, at Little Paddocks at 6:30 p.m. The clock's chime had barely faded when, without warning, the room plunged into darkness. The electric lights flickered once, twice, then extinguished entirely, leaving only the dim glow of the fire to illuminate the startled faces. A collective gasp rose, followed by a nervous titter from Miss Murgatroyd. "Oh my, is this part of it? The game?" Before anyone could respond, the French windows at the far end of the room burst open with a crash, admitting a gust of cold night air that sent the curtains billowing. A harsh beam of light from a flashlight sliced through the gloom, darting erratically across the walls, catching glints of silver teapots and the wide-eyed faces of the guests. "Hands up!" barked a voice, male and accented, Germanic perhaps, or Swiss. "Nobody move." The command was sharp, edged with menace, and for a moment the room froze. Colonel Easterbrook, his military instincts kicking in, half rose from his chair, muttering, "What the devil?" but was cut off by two rapid shots that rang out like thunderclaps. Screams erupted. Mrs. Easterbrook's high-pitched wail, Miss Murgatroyd's startled yelp, and a cry of pain from near the fireplace. A third shot followed, and the flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly before going out. Chaos ensued in the dark. Chairs scraped, someone knocked over a teacup, and Mitzi's voice could be heard from the hall, shrieking in her native tongue. Then, as abruptly as they had failed, the lights snapped back on, revealing a scene of disarray. Letitia Blacklock stood clutching her ear, blood seeping between her fingers and trickling down her neck, staining the collar of her tweed dress. Her face was pale but composed, her lips pressed into a thin line. On the floor, near the French windows, lay a young man, his body crumpled like a discarded marionette. A revolver rested inches from his outstretched hand, and a dark pool spread beneath his head, stark against the polished oak. "Good God!" exclaimed Colonel Easterbrook, striding forward and kneeling beside the figure. He touched the man's wrist, then looked up grimly. "Dead. Shot through the temple. Looks like he turned the gun on himself after firing." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Mrs. Easterbrook clutched her husband's arm, her hat askew. "Archie, it's horrible. Is he really dead? Who is he?" Miss Murgatroyd, trembling, clung to Miss Hinchcliffe, who stood rigid, her jaw set like granite. "Stay calm, Amy," she muttered. "No use panicking." Bunch Harmon, practical despite her shock, hurried to Letitia's side. "Letty, you're hurt. Let me see." She guided Letitia to a chair, fetching a clean napkin to press against the wound. "It's just a graze, thank heaven, but we need a doctor." Letitia waved her off with a shaky hand. "I'm fine, Bunch. A scratch, nothing more. But that poor man." She glanced toward the body, her expression unreadable. Patrick Simmons, his usual flippancy subdued, peered over the colonel's shoulder. "Never seen him before. Some sort of burglar, do you think? Got cold feet and shot himself?" Julia, standing by the sofa, lit another cigarette with trembling fingers. "Burglar? With an announcement in the paper? Don't be daft, Pat. This was planned." Edmund Swettenham, who had been silent, stepped forward, his writer's curiosity overcoming his shock. "There's a wallet in his pocket. Look." He pointed, careful not to touch. Colonel Easterbrook, with a nod, gingerly extracted a worn leather wallet from the man's cheap suit jacket. Inside was a card identifying him as Rudy Schurz, a clerk at the Royale Hotel in Meddenham Wells, some 10 miles away. A few pound notes, a bus ticket, and a photograph of a smiling young woman were all it contained. "Rudy Schurz," mused the colonel. "Swiss by the name, probably a drifter. But what was he playing at?" Miss Hinchcliffe, who had moved to close the French windows against the chill, turned back with a scowl. "Playing? This wasn't a game. He fired at Letty. Look at her ear. If that's not attempted murder, I don't know what is." Letitia, now sipping a glass of water brought by Dora Bunner, shook her head. "It all happened so fast. I heard the shots, felt a sting, and then he fell. Perhaps he didn't mean to hit anyone. Perhaps it was a warning." Dora, hovering anxiously, wrung her hands. "Oh, Letty, it's too awful. Why us? Why here? It's like something out of one of those dreadful films. Mitzi burst into the room, her apron askew, her face a mask of terror. I fixed the lights. In the kitchen the fuse was pulled. Someone did it on purpose. I say this house is cursed. First the newspaper, now this. She crossed herself repeatedly, muttering in her own language. Calm down. Mitzi, said Letitia sharply. Go make some more tea. We'll need it. The cook retreated, still muttering about omens. Philippa Hames, who had remained in her corner, spoke up quietly. Shouldn't someone call the police and a doctor for Miss Blacklock? Quite right, said Colonel Easterbrook, standing. I'll telephone from the hall. Harmon, you stay with the ladies. Simmons, keep an eye on that door. No one goes near the body. Patrick nodded, his face unusually serious. As the colonel strode out, the room settled into an uneasy hush, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Dora's soft whimpers. Miss Murgatroyd, still clinging to Miss Hinchcliffe, whispered, Hinch, did you see where everyone was when the lights went out? I couldn't tell who was who. Don't fuss, Amy, replied Miss Hinchcliffe gruffly. We were all here, muddled together. No one could have slipped out without notice. But her words lacked conviction, and her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the faces of the others. Edmund Swettenham, scribbling notes in a small notebook, caught her glance and flushed, tucking the book away. Julia, exhaling a plume of smoke, watched Letitia with a speculative gaze. Bunch Harmon, still pressing the napkin to Letitia's ear, murmured, It's not deep, but it needs cleaning. Oh, Letty, what a frightful thing. Within 20 minutes, the authorities arrived. Inspector Craddock, a lean, sharp-eyed man from Milchester with a reputation for dogged persistence, stepped into the drawing room, followed by a constable and Dr. Barnes, the local physician. The inspector's gaze swept the scene, taking in the body, the revolver, and the shaken guests. Right, he said briskly. Nobody touch anything. Miss Blacklock, you're injured. Doctor, see to her first. The rest of you, stay where you are. I'll want statements from everyone. Dr. Barnes, a wiry man with a brisk bedside manner, examined Letitia's ear. Superficial graze. Bullet just nicked you. You're lucky, Miss Blacklock. An inch to the left and we'd be having a different conversation. I'll clean and bandage it. No need for hospital unless it festers. Letitia nodded, her composure remarkable under the circumstances. Thank you, Doctor. I'm quite all right, really. Inspector Craddock knelt by the body, his expression grim. Rudy Schurz, eh? Known to us. Petty theft at the Royale. Nothing violent. Looks like a suicide after a botched job, but that advertisement complicates things. He picked up the revolver with a handkerchief, sniffing the barrel. Recently fired. 3 shots, you say? Yes, said Colonel Easterbrook, who had returned. 2 when he burst in, 1 after. Must have turned it on himself. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Must have. We'll see about that. Sergeant Fletcher, bag the weapon and secure the scene. I want photographs and fingerprints before we move him. As the constable set to work, Craddock began questioning the guests. Colonel Easterbrook recounted the sequence of events with military precision. The lights going out, the voice, the shots, the chaos. Mrs. Easterbrook, her voice trembling, added little but confirmed the timing. Miss Hinchcliffe was blunt. He came in, shouted, fired, and dropped. That's it. Miss Murgatroyd, flustered, could only nod, saying she'd been too frightened to see clearly. Bunch Harmon described tending to Letitia's wound, while Philippa admitted she'd been frozen in her chair, unable to move. Edmund Swettenham, hesitant, said he'd been near the door but saw nothing useful in the dark. Patrick and Julia, questioned together, were vague. Patrick joking nervously about dodging bullets, Julia insisting she'd been by the sofa, lighting a cigarette. Dora Bunner, tearful, clung to Letitia's arm. "It was so sudden, Inspector. I was passing the biscuits and then, bang! Poor Letty, nearly killed." Letitia, her ear now bandaged, spoke calmly. "I think he must have placed the advertisement himself, Inspector, for effect, perhaps, to scare us into handing over valuables. But something went wrong, and he panicked." Craddock's eyes lingered on her. Possible. But why announce it? Why not just rob the place quietly? And the fuse, someone pulled it deliberately. Mitzi says she found it tampered with. Mitzi, summoned from the kitchen, launched into a tirade. Yes, I tell you, someone wants us dead. In my country we know such tricks. Lights out, then murder. I fixed the fuse, but I am not safe here." "Enough, Mitzi," said Letitia firmly. "Go to bed. You've had a shock." The inspector turned to the group. "Anyone see who was near the fuse box, or notice anything odd before the lights went out?" Silence met his question, though glances darted between the guests. Miss Hinchcliffe frowned, as if recalling something, but said nothing. Julia stubbed out her cigarette with unnecessary force. Patrick shrugged, his usual grin absent. Craddock dismissed them for the night, instructing them to remain available for further questions. As the guests dispersed, Colonel Easterbrook escorting his wife, Miss Hinchcliffe shepherding Miss Murgatroyd, and the others trailing out into the cold, the inspector lingered by the body. "This isn't as simple as it looks," he murmured to Sergeant Fletcher. "That ad, the fuse, the grays, it's too neat. Someone wanted a spectacle." Outside, the night was still, the village silent save for the crunch of gravel as the guests departed. Letitia Blacklock stood at the door, bidding them good night with her usual courtesy, but her hand trembled slightly as she closed it. Dora, hovering, whispered, "Letty, what if he comes back? What if it's not over?" "Nonsense, Bunny," said Letitia, though her voice held a trace of strain. "He's dead. It's finished." But as she turned to climb the stairs, the memory of the shots echoed in her mind, and the question lingered. Why had the lights gone, out so conveniently? And whose hand had held the revolver? In the darkness beyond the laurels, the night swallowed its secrets, but the stage was set for a deeper unraveling. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. The morning after the shocking events at Little Paddocks dawned gray and damp, with a fine mist cloaking the village of Chipping Cleghorn. The air was heavy with the scent of wet leaves and wood smoke, and the village seemed subdued, as if the gunshot that had shattered the previous evening's gathering still echoed in its lanes. The news of Rudy Scherz's death and the attempt on Letitia Blacklock's life spread like wildfire, whispered over shop counters and garden fences, each retelling adding a layer of speculation. By breakfast time, the villagers were abuzz with theories: a madman, a botched robbery, a revenge plot from some shadowy corner of the past. Yet beneath the gossip, a deeper unease stirred, for the advertisement in the Gazette. A murder is announced, hung over the village like a storm cloud, suggesting a purpose too deliberate to be dismissed as chance. At Little Paddocks, the household stirred uneasily. Letitia Blacklock, her ear neatly bandaged, sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, her face pale but resolute. Dora Bunner, ever solicitous, hovered nearby, her hands fluttering as she arranged toast and marmalade. "Oh, Letty," she said for the third time that morning, You mustn't overdo it. That dreadful man, shooting at you. It's a miracle you're alive. I couldn't sleep a wink thinking of it." Letitia's lips quirked in a faint smile. "I'm quite all right, Bunny. A scratch, nothing more. Let's not dwell on it. We've guests to think of, and the police will want to speak to us again." Her tone was calm, but her eyes flicked toward the window, where the mist pressed against the panes like a silent intruder. Upstairs, Patrick Simmons sprawled across his bed, reading a dog-eared copy of a detective novel, his usual cheer tempered by the previous night's events. Julia, in the next room, stood before her mirror, brushing her blonde hair with slow, deliberate strokes, her expression distant. "Pat," she called through the open door. "Do you think Aunt Letty's hiding something? She was awfully calm for someone who nearly got shot." Patrick lowered his book. "Hiding? Ju, you've been reading too many thrillers. Aunt Letty's just got a stiff upper lip. Old school, you know? Besides, who'd want to kill her? She's practically a saint round here." Julia arched an eyebrow. "Saints don't get shot at. And that ad? It's too bizarre. Someone planned this, Pat. Someone who knew she'd be here, with all of us as witnesses." Their conversation was interrupted by Mitzi's voice from below, shrill with indignation. "I tell you, I leave this house. First guns, now police. Next it will be poison in the soup. I am not safe." The clatter of pans punctuated her tirade. Letitia sighed, rising to soothe the cook. "Mitzi's nerves will be the death of us before any gunman," she murmured to Dora, who nodded fervently. Meanwhile, Inspector Craddock had begun his investigation in earnest. He arrived at Little Paddock's at 9 o'clock, his lean frame clad in a sober gray suit, his sharp eyes missing nothing. With him came Sergeant Fletcher, a burly man with a notebook and a penchant for precision. The inspector first examined the drawing room, now restored to order but for the chalk outline where Rudy Scherz's body had lain. The French windows bore no signs of forced entry, and the fuse box in the kitchen showed faint smudges of oil. Deliberate tampering, Craddock concluded. He sat down with Letitia in the morning room, a cozy space lined with bookshelves and faded photographs. "Miss Blacklock," he began, his tone measured, "I need to understand your background. You've lived here since the war, I gather. Before that?" Letitia folded her hands, her gaze steady. "I worked in London, in finance, for Randall Godler, a brilliant man, but demanding. He died some years ago, leaving his fortune to his wife, Belle, who's now in Scotland, quite frail. Upon her death, I inherit the bulk of it, as she has no children. There are distant relatives, the Swettenham twins, I believe, who would inherit if I predeceased her. But that's all rather academic, Inspector. I lead a quiet life here." Craddock nodded, jotting notes. "And this Scherz, any connection to you? Ever seen him before last night?" "Never," she said firmly. "I'd have remembered. He must have been a stranger, perhaps someone who read about the Godler fortune and thought to exploit it." Dora, who had crept in with a tray of coffee, interjected. "Oh, Letty, it's like something out of our school days. Remember how we used to read those penny dreadfuls? But this is real. Too real." Her voice quavered, and she dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Craddock turned to her. "Miss Bunner, you and Miss Blacklock go back a long way, I understand. Anything from the past that might explain this?" Dora blinked, flustered. "Oh, goodness, no. We were at school together, such happy times, before poor Charlotte died. Letty's sister, you know, with that dreadful goiter. She passed in Switzerland, where Letty nursed her. So sad. She sniffled, glancing at Letitia, who gave her a gentle but pointed look. Switzerland? Craddock's pencil paused. When was this? Letitia answered smoothly. During the war, 1942, I think. Charlotte had a thyroid condition, quite severe. She underwent treatment in a clinic near Bern, but it was too late. I stayed with her until the end. Craddock made a note, his expression unreadable. And after that, you came here? Yes, to settle down. The war had turned everything upside down, and Chipping Cleghorn seemed a haven. The inspector moved on to question the others. Patrick and Julia, interviewed together, were evasive. Patrick admitted to a brief stint in the Navy, discharged for minor infractions, and Julia claimed she'd been working as a typist in London, though her vague description of her employer raised Craddock's eyebrow. We're just here for a holiday, Patrick said with a grin. No skeletons in our closets, Inspector. Mitzi, when summoned, was a whirlwind of accusations. I see nothing. I hear nothing. I am in the kitchen, slaving, when the lights go out. Someone wants to kill us all. I know it. Craddock dismissed her gently, noting her fear was genuine, but unhelpful. Leaving little Paddocks, Craddock drove to the Royale Hotel in Meddenham Wells, a faded establishment catering to commercial travelers. The manager, a fussy man named Mr. Rowlandson, confirmed Rudy Schertz's identity. A Swiss lad, been with us 6 months, charming enough, but light-fingered, caught pilfering from guests' rooms once or twice. Nothing we could prove, mind you. He was popular with the ladies, always flashing that smile. Did he have any particular associates? Craddock asked. Rowlandson hesitated. There was talk of a young woman, blonde, stylish, seen with him at a cafe in town. Couldn't say who she was, and he'd been making odd phone calls lately, secretive-like. Craddock's interest sharpened. A blonde woman. Could it be Julia Simmons? He made a mental note to press her further. Back in Chipping Cleghorn, the village was alive with speculation. At the Bluebird Cafe, where locals gathered over scones and gossip, Mrs. Easterbrook held court, her feathered hat bobbing as she recounted the previous night's drama. It was like a film, I tell you, that man bursting in, the shots. Poor Letty, so brave. But who was he? Some foreign spy, perhaps? Miss Hinchcliffe, at a corner table with Miss Murgatroyd, snorted. Spy? Rubbish. Probably a crook who bit off more than he could chew. But the fuse business, that's no accident. Someone in that room knew what was coming. Miss Murgatroyd's eyes widened. Hinch, you don't think one of us? Don't be daft, Amy, said Miss Hinchcliffe, though her tone lacked its usual brusqueness. Still, I'd like to know where everyone was standing when the lights went out. I was by the sofa, and you were next to me, fussing with your scarf. Miss Murgatroyd nodded. Yes, but it was so dark. I thought I saw someone move toward the door, but I couldn't be sure. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bunch Harmon, who slid into a chair with a sigh. What a night. Poor Letty. She's putting on a brave face, but she must be shaken. And Julian says the church committee's all in a tizzy about it. Bad for the parish, he says. Miss Hinchcliffe raised an eyebrow. Bad for the parish? It's bad for Letty Blacklock. Someone meant to kill her, and they might try, again. Bunch shivered. Oh, don't say that, Hinch. It was just a madman, wasn't it? He's dead now. Is he? Said Miss Hinchcliffe darkly. I wonder. At the vicarage, Bunch was preparing tea for her aunt, who had arrived the previous day for a visit. Miss Jane Marple, a frail figure with snow-white hair and eyes that missed nothing, sat in the parlor, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. Her appearance was deceptively mild, but her mind was as sharp as the needles in her hands. Bunch recounted the events at Little Paddocks, her words tumbling over each other. "It was awful, Aunt Jane. The lights went out, and bang, shots. Poor Letty got grazed, and this man, Rudy something, was dead on the floor. The police think he shot himself, but that advertisement, it's so strange." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Strange, indeed. Bunch, dear. An announcement like that suggests forethought, not madness. It reminds me of a case in St. Mary Mead, years ago, when a notice in the parish magazine led to quite a different sort of trouble. Human nature, you see, is much the same everywhere. People reveal themselves in the smallest ways." Bunch frowned. "Reveal themselves? You mean someone in that room?" "I mean," said Miss Marple gently, "that we must look at who benefits and who knows what. Tell me about Miss Blacklock's household and this inheritance I've heard mentioned." Bunch obliged, describing Letitia's connection to the Godler fortune, Dora's fluttery devotion, the Simmons cousins' carefree manner, and Mitzi's theatrics. "And Philippa Hames was there. She's a widow, works at Dias Hall. Quiet, but nice. Oh, and Edmund Swettenham, who fancies himself a writer. His mother's a bit of a dragon." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the details like a puzzle. "And this Shatters, did anyone recognize him?" "No, but the police are looking into it. Aunt Jane, do you think it's safe for Letty to stay there?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Safe? My dear, safety is relative, but I think I shall stay a few days longer. Chipping Cleghorn sounds most instructive." By midday, Craddock was back at Little Paddocks, this time with a new piece of information. He had spoken to a barmaid at the Red Lion in Meddenham Wells, who recalled seeing Rudy Shatters with a young woman matching Julia Simmons's description, a fact Julia flatly denied when confronted. "Me? With a hotel clerk? Don't be ridiculous, Inspector," she said, her voice cool but her cheeks flushing. "I've never set foot in Meddenham Wells." Patrick, lounging nearby, laughed. "Ju, you're blushing like a schoolgirl. Been sneaking off to cafes, have you?" "Shut up, Pat," she snapped, and Craddock noted the exchange with interest. He also interviewed Philippa Hames, who had returned to her gardening duties at Dias Hall. She was pruning roses when he approached, her movements precise despite the cold. "Mrs. Hames," he said, "you were quiet last night. Anything you've remembered since?" Philippa hesitated, her dark eyes meeting his. "Nothing specific, Inspector. It was all so sudden, the darkness, the noise. I was in the corner, near the bookcase. I didn't see much." Craddock pressed gently. "You're connected to the Godler family, I understand. A distant relative?" She stiffened. "Yes, but I don't dwell on it. I make my own way. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with this—" "Not at all," Craddock said smoothly. "Just covering all angles." Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple was knitting a pale blue shawl, her thoughts elsewhere. She recalled Dora Bunner's mention of Switzerland and Charlotte Blacklock's death. "Goiter," she murmured, "such an old-fashioned affliction, and yet so distinctive." She made a mental note to inquire further. That afternoon, a second incident shook Little Paddocks. Letitia, descending the stairs to the hall, slipped on a patch of oil, narrowly catching herself on the banister. Mitzi, summoned to clean it, shrieked, "Sabotage! Someone wants to kill us all!" Letitia dismissed it as an accident, but her eyes were troubled. Craddock, informed of the incident, arrived to inspect the scene. The oil was linseed, commonly used for polishing furniture, but its placement was deliberate. "Someone's playing a dangerous game," he muttered to Sergeant Fletcher. "First the shooting, now this. Miss Blacklock's not safe." Miss Marple, hearing of the incident from Bunch, who had rushed to the vicarage with the news, set down her knitting. "Oil on the stairs," she said softly. "How very suggestive. It's like the time Mrs. Barton in St. Mary Mead nearly fell after a neighbor's prank went wrong. But this is no prank, Bunch. Someone is testing the waters." Bunch stared. "Aunt Jane, you don't think it's one of us? Someone in the village?" Miss Marple's eyes were grave. "I think, my dear, that we must look at the past. Secrets have a way of resurfacing, like ripples in a pond. And ripples, you know, always start somewhere." As evening fell, the mist thickened, wrapping Chipping Cleghorn in a shroud of uncertainty. At Little Paddocks, Letitia locked the doors, her hand lingering on the bolt. Dora, beside her, whispered, "Letty, what if it happens again?" "It won't," said Letitia firmly, but her voice held a tremor. Outside, the village settled into uneasy silence, but the whispers of the past were growing louder, and the truth, like the mist, was waiting to clear. Chapter 5. The Sleuth from St. Mary Mead. The mist that had cloaked Chipping Cleghorn the previous day lingered into the next, softening the outlines of the village's cottages and lending an air of secrecy to its quiet lanes. The events at Little Paddocks had cast a long shadow, and though the villagers went about their daily routines, buying bread at the bakery, posting letters, or tending their gardens, their conversations were dominated by the shooting of Rudy Schurz and the narrow escape of Letitia Blacklock. The Gazette's announcement of a murder had proven all too prophetic, and the question on every lip was whether the danger had passed or was merely biding its time. At the vicarage, Miss Jane Marple sat in a chintz-covered armchair by the window, her knitting a cascade of pale blue wool in her lap. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, illuminating her delicate features and the sharp intelligence in her eyes, which belied her frail appearance. Her niece, Bunch Harmon, bustled in with a tray of tea and scones, her round face creased with worry. "Aunt Jane, I can't stop thinking about Letty. That oil on the stairs yesterday. It wasn't an accident, was it? And poor Rudy Schurz, dead on the floor. It's like a nightmare." Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, a soothing counterpoint to Bunch's agitation. "A nightmare? Yes, but one with a pattern, my dear. In my experience, human nature follows certain paths, and this affair has the marks of calculation. The advertisement, the tampered fuse, the graze on Miss Blacklock's ear, all too precise for a random act. Tell me, Bunch, what do you know of Miss Blacklock's past beyond what you've already said?" Bunch poured tea, frowning. "Not much, really. She's lived here since the war, always been kind. Helps with the church fete, you know. Dora Bunner says they were school friends, and Letty nursed her sister Charlotte in Switzerland. There's the Godler fortune, of course, but that's common knowledge. Why, Aunt Jane? Do you think the past has something to do with it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "The past always has something to do with it, Bunch. People carry their histories like shadows, and shadows can hide many things. I should like to meet Miss Blacklock and her household. There's often truth in the little things, slips of the tongue, a glance, a hesitation." Bunch brightened. "Well, you're in luck. Letty's invited us for tea this afternoon. She says it's to keep spirits up after all the fuss. The Easterbrooks will be there, and Hinch and Murgatroyd, and I think Philippa Hames, too. Oh, and Edmund Swettenham, though his mother might keep him away, she's awfully protective." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over the names. "Excellent. A gathering will be most illuminating. Now, tell me about this young man, Shatters. Did anyone know him?" Bunch shook her head. "Not that I've heard. The police say he was a bit of a rogue, petty theft, that sort of thing. But no one in the village recognized him. It's so odd, Aunt Jane, the way he burst in and then shot himself. Or did he?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "That, my dear, is the question. A man announces a murder, enters with a gun, and ends up dead, leaving his intended victim with a mere graze. It's almost theatrical, like a play staged for an audience. And the audience, Bunch, was everyone in that room." Bunch shivered. "You make it sound so sinister. You don't think one of us—" "I think," said Miss Marple gently, "that we must keep our eyes open. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a woman who seemed the soul of kindness, yet she poisoned 3 husbands before anyone suspected. Appearances, you see, are not always truth." At Little Paddocks, the morning was a whirl of activity. Letitia Blacklock, despite her bandaged ear, was determined to maintain normalcy. She directed Mitzi to prepare for the afternoon's tea, ignoring the cook's muttered predictions of doom. "More people, more trouble," Mitzi declared, slamming a mixing bowl onto the counter. "First guns, now cakes. Soon it will be poison, I tell you." Letitia's patience was wearing thin. "Mitzi, if you mention poison once more, I'll send you to the employment agency. Now, get on with the scones." Dora Bunner, hovering in the doorway, wrung her hands. "Oh, Letty, don't be cross with her. She's frightened, poor thing. After last night, who wouldn't be? I keep thinking I hear footsteps in the garden." Letitia softened, patting her friend's arm. "Nonsense, Bunny. It's over. The police are handling it, and we'll have a nice tea to cheer everyone up. Patrick and Julia are helping, aren't they?" Upstairs, the Simmons cousins were less helpful than Letitia hoped. Patrick, sprawled on a sofa in the drawing room, was tossing a tennis ball against the wall, much to Julia's irritation. "Must you do that, Pat?" she snapped, flipping through a fashion magazine. "You're giving me a headache." Patrick grinned. "Just keeping my reflexes sharp, Ju, in case another gunman shows up. You know, I've been thinking maybe Shatters was hired by someone. That ad wasn't cheap, and he didn't strike me as rolling in cash." Julia's eyes narrowed. "Hired? By whom? Aunt Letty's not exactly swimming in enemies, unless you think it's about the money." "What else?" Patrick said, catching the ball. "The Godler fortune's a tidy sum. Maybe someone wants her out of the way before old Belle kicks the bucket." Julia set down her magazine, her expression thoughtful. "You're not as dim as you act, Pat. But who? Those Swettenham twins? They're hardly master criminals. And Philippa Hames, she's too busy digging in the dirt to plot murders." Patrick shrugged. "Dunno, but I bet the police are sniffing around. That Craddock chap's got a look like he can smell a lie a mile off." Inspector Craddock, indeed, was pursuing his inquiries with relentless focus. He had returned to the Royale Hotel in Meddenham Wells, where a chambermaid provided a new lead. Rudy Schertz had been seen scribbling in a notebook, muttering about big money and a sure thing. The notebook, found in his room, contained cryptic entries: LB, neck, clinic, and ask about the pearls. Craddock's interest sharpened. Pearls? Could they be part of the Godler estate? And neck suggested a connection to Letitia's injury, or perhaps something else. Back in Chipping Cleghorn, Craddock called on Colonel Easterbrook at Dias Hall. The colonel, polishing his golf clubs in the study, was eager to assist. "Damned odd business, Inspector. In my day, we'd have had the blighter court-martialed for such a stunt. But I saw him near here a week ago, skulking by the hedge, bold as brass. Thought he was poaching." Craddock's pencil hovered. "You didn't mention this last night, Colonel." "Didn't think it relevant," said the colonel, flushing. "Just a vagrant, I thought. But now, well, perhaps he was casing the place." Mrs. Easterbrook, entering with a tray of biscuits, overheard. "Oh, Archie, you never said. A prowler? How dreadful. Do you think he was after Letty's jewels? Everyone knows about the Godler inheritance." Craddock filed the information away, his mind turning to the possibility of a planned robbery gone wrong. But the advertisement nagged at him. Why announce it? He thanked the Easterbrooks and drove to the Boulders, where Miss Hinchcliffe was mucking out the pigsty, her sleeves rolled up and her face set in a scowl. "Inspector," she greeted him curtly. "Come to ask more fool questions? I told you all I saw. Man came in, fired, dropped. That's the lot." Craddock nodded, unfazed. "I'm more interested in the fuse box, Miss Hinchcliffe. You were near the door. Did you notice anyone moving before the lights went out?" Miss Hinchcliffe paused, leaning on her pitchfork. "Dark as pitch in there, Inspector. Amy was fussing with her scarf, as usual, and I was trying to keep her from tripping over the furniture. Couldn't swear to anyone else's position." Miss Murgatroyd, appearing at the cottage door, called out, "Hinch, don't be so grumpy. Inspector, I thought I saw someone near the hall, but I can't be sure. It was all so quick, and then the shots. Oh, it was dreadful." Craddock thanked them and left, his suspicions deepening. Someone in that room had known the lights would fail. But who? At 4 o'clock, Miss Marple and Bunch arrived at Little Paddock's for tea. The drawing-room was once again a picture of hospitality, with a lace-covered table laden with scones, jam, and Mitzi's feather-light sponge cake. Letitia greeted them warmly, her bandaged ear hidden by a silk scarf. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to come. Bunch has told me so much about you. I'm afraid we're a bit shaken, but we mustn't let it spoil our day." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes keen as they took in the room. Colonel and Mrs. Easterbrook were already there, the colonel pontificating about crime rates, Mrs. Easterbrook nodding under her latest extravagant hat. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd sat by the fire, the former looking impatient, the latter nibbling a scone with nervous enthusiasm. Philippa Hames, in a simple gray dress, sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Patrick and Julia lounged near the window, exchanging whispered barbs, while Dora Bunner flitted about, offering plates and chattering about the weather. Miss Marple settled into a chair, accepting a cup of tea from Dora. "Such a charming house, Miss Blacklock," she said, "and such a gathering, despite the recent unpleasantness. It reminds me of a tea party in St. Mary Mead, where a most curious incident occurred, though not so dramatic as yours." Dora's eyes lit up. "Oh, do tell, Miss Marple. I love a story. Letty, you remember how we used to swap tales at school? Before everything changed." Letitia's smile was tight. "Yes, Bunny, but let's not bore our guests with old memories." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Letitia, noting the slight tension in her posture. "Oh, I find old memories most revealing," she said airily. "They often hold the key to present troubles. You and Miss Bunner were at school together, I understand. And you mentioned a sister. Miss Bunner? Charlotte, was it? Dora nodded eagerly. Yes, poor Charlotte. Such a sweet girl, but so ill with that goiter. Letty was an angel, nursing her in Switzerland. It broke her heart when Charlotte died. Letitia's cup clinked against its saucer. It was a long time ago, Bunny. Let's talk of happier things. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Switzerland, a goiter, a sister's death. These were not mere details, but threads in a tapestry. She turned the conversation to the village, drawing out stories of local life. Mrs. Easterbrook complained about the difficulty of finding reliable maids, while Colonel Easterbrook recounted his sighting of Shatters near Dias Hall. Miss Hinchcliffe grumbled about the price of pig feed, and Miss Murgatroyd, emboldened by tea, ventured, "I keep thinking about the lamp, Miss Blacklock. The one by the sofa. It wasn't there last night, was it? I could have sworn it was moved." Letitia frowned. "The lamp? It's always there, Amy. You must be mistaken." Miss Hinchcliffe shot her friend a warning glance. "Don't fuss, Amy. It was dark, hard to see anything." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. A lamp moved, another small discrepancy, like the oil on the stairs. She filed it away, turning her attention to Philippa Hames, who had said little. "Mrs. Hames, you're a gardener, I hear. Such a peaceful occupation. Do you find it so?" Philippa's dark eyes met hers, wary but polite. "It's hard work, Miss Marple, but yes, peaceful. I like being alone with the plants." "And yet you were here last night," said Miss Marple gently. "Such a shock for you." Philippa nodded, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Yes, I didn't expect any of it." The conversation shifted, but Miss Marple's mind remained on Philippa. A widow, connected to the Godler family, yet living modestly. There was a story there, she was sure. She glanced at Patrick and Julia, noting their easy familiarity, tinged with tension. Patrick was teasing Julia about her secret admirer in Medmenham Wells, and Julia's sharp retort drew a laugh from Colonel Easterbrook. As the tea party wound down, Miss Marple excused herself to admire the garden, accompanied by Dora, who chattered about roses and the old days. "Letty's always been so strong," Dora said wistfully. "Even after Switzerland, when she came back, so changed. Grief, you know, it marks a person." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes on the laurels where Shatters had emerged. "Indeed it does, Miss Bunner. Grief or guilt." Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with Bunch, recounting the afternoon. "There's a pattern forming, Bunch. The lamp, the oil, the graze on Miss Blacklock's ear, all staged perhaps to create an impression. And Dora Bunner's memories, they're like loose threads. Switzerland, Charlotte, the goiter. I must learn more." Bunch stared. "Aunt Jane, you sound like you suspect Letty herself." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I suspect nothing, dear. I observe. And I wonder. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a woman who hid a great secret behind a kind face. People, you see, are not always what they seem." That evening, Inspector Craddock called at the vicarage, seeking Bunch's perspective as a witness. Miss Marple, knitting quietly, listened as he shared his findings. Scherze's notebook, the oil on the stairs, the blonde woman in Medmenham Wells. "It's a puzzle, Mrs. Harmon," he said, "and I don't like puzzles without answers." Miss Marple spoke up, her voice mild. "Puzzles, Inspector, are solved by the small things. The fuse box, for instance. Someone in that room knew it would be tampered with. And Miss Blacklock's graze, so conveniently minor. In my village we had a case where a staged accident hid a deeper motive. Look to the why, Inspector, not just the how." Craddock, initially dismissive of the elderly spinster, found himself intrigued. "You think it's staged? Shatters was part of a bigger plan?" "I think," said Miss Marple, "that someone wanted us to believe in a failed robbery. But the real question is what they're hiding, and why now?" As Craddock left, his notebook heavier with questions, Miss Marple resumed her knitting. The mist outside had thickened, but in her mind, the outlines of the truth were beginning to emerge, like shapes through the fog. Chapter 6. Hidden Alliances. The mist that had lingered over Chipping Cleghorn began to lift by mid-morning, revealing a sky of pale, uncertain blue. The village, however, remained under a cloud of unease, its inhabitants still reeling from the violent intrusion at little paddocks and the unsettling incidents that followed. The death of Rudy Shatters, the oil on the stairs, and the cryptic clues in his notebook, each added a layer to the mystery, like sediment settling in a pond, obscuring the truth beneath. At the Bluebird Cafe, the grocer's shop, and the post office, speculation ran rampant, with theories ranging from foreign conspiracies to local grudges. Yet the villagers, for all their chatter, sensed that the heart of the matter lay closer to home, hidden in the polite smiles and familiar faces of their neighbors. At Little Paddocks, Letitia Blacklock maintained her air of calm authority, though the strain was evident in the faint lines around her eyes. She sat in the morning room, sorting through correspondence, while Dora Bunner fussed over a vase of dahlias, her nervous energy filling the silence. "Letty, you really ought to rest," Dora said, adjusting a flower for the third time. "After that dreadful fall on the stairs, oh, I can't bear to think what might have happened." Letitia looked up, her pen pausing. "It was no fall, Bunny, just a slip, and I'm perfectly fine. We mustn't let these things unsettle us. The police are doing their work, and we've a household to run." Her tone was brisk, but her gaze lingered on the window, where the garden lay quiet under the weak sunlight. Upstairs, Patrick Simmons was pacing the landing, his usual nonchalance replaced by a restless energy. Julia, leaning against the banister, watched him with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "For heaven's sake, Pat, you're like a caged tiger. What's got you so jumpy?" Patrick stopped, running a hand through his hair. "It's this whole business, Ju. First the shooting, now the oil. Who's next? Aunt Letty's acting like it's just another day, but someone's got it in for her. And that notebook Craddock mentioned. Neck and pearls. Sounds like a code." Julia's eyes narrowed, her cigarette forgotten in its holder. "A code? You're getting fanciful. But I'll admit, it's odd. Shatters wasn't the mastermind type. Someone put him up to it, and I'd bet my best hat it's tied to the Godler money. Aunt Letty's sitting on a fortune, and fortunes make people do queer things." Their conversation was cut short by Mitzi's voice, rising from the kitchen in a now familiar wail. "I tell you, I go back to London. This house, it is haunted. Oil on stairs, guns in the night. Next it will be knives." Letitia's firm voice followed, calming the storm, but the cousins exchanged a glance. "She's not wrong," Patrick muttered. "This place is starting to feel like a trap." Inspector Craddock, meanwhile, was piecing together fragments of the puzzle in his office at Milchester. The notebook found in Rudy Scherze's room lay open before him, its cryptic entries: LB, neck, clinic, and ask about the pearls, taunting his orderly mind. He had sent Sergeant Fletcher to the Gazette office to trace the advertisement's origin, but the trail was cold, paid in cash, posted through the letterbox, no witnesses. The barmaid's report of Shatters with a blonde woman nagged at him, especially since Julia Simmons's denial had been so vehement. He decided to revisit Little Paddocks, this time with a sharper focus on the household dynamics. Arriving at noon, Craddock found Letitia in the garden, inspecting the rose beds with Philippa Hames, who had stopped by to discuss pruning schedules. Philippa, her hands stained with earth, looked up warily as the inspector approached. "Mrs. Hames," he said, nodding politely. "I'd like a word, if you don't mind. Miss Blacklock, may I use the morning room?" Letitia gestured toward the house. "Of course, Inspector. I'll be in shortly. Philippa, don't let me keep you from your work." Inside, Craddock sat across from Philippa, whose quiet demeanor belied a steely reserve. "Mrs. Hames," he began, "you mentioned you're a distant relative of the Godler family. Can you clarify your connection?" Philippa's fingers tightened around her gardening gloves. "It's remote, Inspector. My mother was a cousin of Randall Godler's. I'd heard of the will, but I never expected anything from it. I work for my living, gardening at Dias Hall, as you know. I don't dwell on legacies." Craddock leaned forward. "But if Miss Blacklock were to die before Belle Godler, you'd stand to inherit, yes? Along with the Swettenham twins?" Philippa's eyes flashed. "If you're implying I had anything to do with that shooting, you're mistaken. I was in the drawing room, frozen like everyone else. I've no interest in scheming for money I don't need." Craddock noted her defensiveness, but pressed gently. "Did you ever meet Rudy Shatters, perhaps in Medmenham Wells?" "No," she said firmly. "I don't go there. My life's here, with my work and my son. Ask anyone." Craddock let her go, his suspicions unallayed. Philippa's connection to the Godler fortune, however distant, made her a person of interest, and her reticence suggested more than shyness. He turned to Letitia, who had joined him, her expression calm but watchful. "Miss Blacklock, about these pearls mentioned in Schertz's notebook. Part of the Godler estate, perhaps?" Letitia hesitated, then nodded. "Possibly. Randall Godler left some jewelry, pearls among them, hidden during the war for safety. I don't know where they are. He was secretive about such things. If Scherz knew of them, he might have thought to steal them." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "And the word neck, any significance?" Letitia touched her bandaged ear, a wry smile flickering. "Beyond the obvious?" "No, Inspector. Perhaps he meant my necklace, but I wasn't wearing one that night." Their conversation was interrupted by Dora Bunner, who burst in, her face flushed. "Letty, the postman says Mrs. Swettenham's been asking about you. Wanted to know if you're selling the house. Imagine, after all this." She paused, noticing Craddock. "Oh, Inspector, I didn't mean to interrupt." Craddock seized the opportunity. "Miss Bunner, you mentioned Switzerland yesterday. Can you tell me more about Miss Blacklock's sister?" Dora's face softened. Poor Charlotte. She was so pretty, but that goiter, it made her so shy. Letty took her to a clinic in Bern, the best doctors, but she didn't make it. Letty came back alone, so changed. Grief, you know. Letitia's voice was sharp. "Bunny, that's enough. The inspector doesn't need our family history." Craddock made a mental note of Letitia's discomfort. Switzerland again. There was something there, he was sure. He thanked them and left, determined to dig deeper into Scherz's connections. In the village, Miss Marple was making her own inquiries, disguised as casual chats. She visited the post office where Mrs. Mop, the postmistress, was eager to share gossip. "That Scherz fellow, Miss Marple, Never saw him here, but I heard he was a charmer. Always after the ladies, they say. And that advertisement? Posted right here, but no one saw who did it." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. "How curious. In St. Mary Mead, we had a case where a letter was posted anonymously, and it led to all sorts of trouble. People hide their tracks, Mrs. Mop, but they always leave a trace. At the Boulders, Miss Hinchcliffe was repairing a fence when Miss Marple stopped by, ostensibly to admire the pigs. Miss Murgatroyd, bustling out with a tray of lemonade, greeted her warmly. "Oh, Miss Marple, isn't it dreadful? Poor Letty, and that awful man. Hinch says it's all about money, but I can't believe anyone we know would do such a thing." Miss Hinchcliffe snorted, hammering a nail with unnecessary force. "Money's always the root, Amy. Blacklock's got a fortune coming, and someone's greedy. I saw something odd that night, though, someone fiddling with the lamp by the sofa before the lights went out. Couldn't see who, but it wasn't right." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "A lamp? Miss Murgatroyd mentioned it at tea. How interesting. In my village, a misplaced object once pointed to a very clever deception." Miss Murgatroyd gasped. "Hinch, you didn't tell me? Was it moved on purpose?" "Don't fuss, Amy," said Miss Hinchcliffe, but her frown deepened. "It's probably nothing, just my eyes playing tricks." Miss Marple filed the detail away, her mind turning to the dynamics of the gathering. She thanked them and continued her walk, pausing at Dias Hall to chat with Philippa Hames, who was weeding a flower bed. "Mrs. Hames," she said gently, "you must find all this upheaval distressing. Have you known Miss Blacklock long?" Philippa straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Not long, Miss Marple. I started at Dias Hall last year. She's been kind, inviting me to tea sometimes. I try to keep to myself." Miss Marple nodded, noting the guarded tone. "A wise choice, in such times. But you were there that night. Did you notice anything unusual? A movement, perhaps, before the lights failed?" Philippa hesitated, her eyes flickering. "It was too dark, and everyone was talking. I was by the bookcase, out of the way. I'm not much for crowds." Miss Marple smiled, sensing a reluctance to reveal more. "Of course, crowds can be overwhelming. Thank you, my dear." Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with Bunch, piecing together her observations. "There's a web here, Bunch, and it's tightening. The lamp, the oil, the notebook, all point to a plan, not a random act. And Dora Bunner's talk of Switzerland. It's like a story I heard in St. Mary Mead, where a sister's death hid a darker truth. I must speak to Inspector Craddock." That evening, Craddock called at Little Paddock's, summoned by a frantic Dora. Letitia had received an anonymous letter, slipped under the door. The first was a warning, the next will not miss. The handwriting was crude, the paper cheap, but the threat was clear. Letitia handed it to Craddock, her face pale but composed. "It's probably nonsense, Inspector, but I thought you should see it." Craddock's jaw tightened. "Nonsense or not, Miss Blacklock, you're to take no chances. I'll post a constable outside tonight, and I want a list of everyone who's been in this house since yesterday." As he left, Craddock met Miss Marple, who was walking back to the vicarage with Bunch. "Inspector," she said, her voice mild, "I couldn't help overhearing about the letter. It reminds me of a case in St. Mary Mead, where threats were used to distract from the real crime. Have you considered that shares might have been a pawn, not the player?" Craddock, warming to the old lady's insight, nodded. "I'm beginning to think so. His notebook suggests blackmail. Neck, clinic, pearls. Any thoughts on that? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Pearls are often heirlooms, Inspector, and necks can hide scars or secrets. Look to Miss Blacklock's past and those closest to her. Someone knows more than they're saying. Craddock left, his mind buzzing. At Little Paddock's the evening settled uneasily. Patrick and Julia played cards in the drawing room, their banter strained. Mitzi locked the kitchen door, muttering about curses. Dora clung to Letitia, who sat by the fire, her eyes distant. "It'll be all right, Bunny," she said softly. "It's just a prank." But as the firelight danced on the walls, the anonymous letter lay heavy on her mind, and the shadows of hidden alliances seemed to close in. Chapter 7. The Fatal Tea Party. The pale October sun struggled through a veil of clouds, casting a wan light over Chipping Cleghorn as the village settled into an uneasy routine. The shock of Rudy Scherz's death and the subsequent threats against Letitia Blacklock, the oil on the stairs, the anonymous letter, had woven a thread of fear through the community. Conversations in the village shop and at the bus stop were hushed, eyes darting as if expecting another calamity. The Gazette's cryptic announcement, once a curiosity, now loomed like a prophecy fulfilled, and the villagers wondered who among them might harbor a motive dark enough to orchestrate such a scheme. At Little Paddock's, Letitia Blacklock was determined to defy the atmosphere of dread. She had organized another tea party, ostensibly to restore normalcy and reassure her neighbors. The drawing room was arranged with its usual elegance. A silver tea service gleamed on a lace-covered table, flanked by plates of Mitzi's scones and a Victoria sponge that, despite the cook's histrionics, was a triumph of lightness. The fire crackled in the grate, and the scent of wood smoke mingled with the faint perfume of late roses from the garden. Yet the air held a tension, like a violin string wound too tight, ready to snap. Letitia, her bandaged ear concealed by a stylish scarf, greeted her guests with her customary poise. "We mustn't let these events rule us," she said to Colonel and Mrs. Easterbrook, who arrived first. The Colonel's bluster subdued, his wife's hat more subdued than usual. "Tea and good company are the best remedy." Mrs. Easterbrook nodded, though her eyes darted to the French windows, now firmly locked. "You're so brave, Letty. After that letter, the next will not miss. I'd be a nervous wreck. Archie says we should all carry revolvers, but I think that's going too far." The Colonel harumphed, adjusting his tie. "Nonsense, Laura. A good rifle's the thing. Never trusted revolvers. Too erratic. But Blacklock, you're sure you're safe here?" Letitia smiled thinly. "As safe as one can be, Colonel. The police are keeping watch, and I've no intention of hiding." Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd arrived next, the former striding in with her usual vigor, the latter clutching a woolen shawl and murmuring about the chill. "Letty, you're a marvel," said Miss Hinchcliffe, helping herself to a scone. "Most people would have bolted after that shooting, but I keep thinking about that lamp. Amy's right. It wasn't where it should have been. Someone moved it before the lights went out." Miss Murgatroyd nodded, her eyes wide. "I'm sure of it, Hinch. It was by the sofa, always is. But that night, gone. I said so at the last tea, didn't I?" Letitia's expression tightened, but she waved a hand dismissively. "Really, Amy, it's just a lamp. The room was dark, and we were all muddled. Let's not make mysteries where there are none." Miss Marple, arriving with Bunch Harmon, observed the exchange from the doorway, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. Her mild gaze took in the room. Patrick Simmons lounging by the window, tossing a coin and catching it with a practiced flick. Julia Simmons, elegant in a tailored dress, lighting a cigarette with a studied air of indifference. Philippa Hames, quiet as ever, sitting near the bookcase with a cup of tea. And Dora Bunner, flitting about with plates, her chatter a nervous counterpoint to the room's unease. Edmund Swetnam, late as usual, slipped in with an apologetic smile, his notebook peeking from his pocket. "Miss Blacklock," said Miss Marple, settling into a chair. "You're most kind to host us again. It reminds me of a gathering in St. Mary Mead, where a small incident revealed a great deal. The smallest details, you know, can be so telling." Letitia's smile was polite but guarded. "I'm sure they can, Miss Marple, but I hope today will be uneventful. Tea, everyone?" As the guests settled, conversation turned to safer topics: village fates, the price of coal, the upcoming harvest supper. But the undercurrent of the recent events was inescapable. Colonel Easterbrook recounted his sighting of Schurz near Dias Hall, embellishing the tale with military flair. Skulking he was, like a scout before a raid. Should have nabbed him then, saved us all this trouble. Mrs. Easterbrook shivered. "Oh, Archie, don't. It's too horrible. Letty, have the police found anything new? That letter, surely they've traced it." Letitia shook her head. "Not yet, Laura. Inspector Craddock says it's common paper, impossible to trace. But he's thorough. I trust him to get to the bottom of it." Miss Marple, sipping her tea, listened intently. She noted Dora Bunner's nervous glances toward Letitia, as if seeking reassurance, and Patrick's restless energy, his coin now stilled in his hand. Julia's cool detachment seemed forced, her eyes flicking to Philippa, who sat silently, her gaze fixed on her cup. Edmund, scribbling in his notebook, caught Miss Marple's eye and flushed, tucking it away. The conversation faltered when Mitzi entered, bearing a fresh pot of tea with a flourish that bordered on theatrical. "Tea, more tea," she declared, her accent thick with indignation. "You all sit, eat, drink, while danger is everywhere. In my country we run from such things." Letitia's voice was sharp. "Thank you, Mitzi. That will do." The cook retreated, muttering about curses. Miss Marple turned to Dora, her tone gentle. "Miss Bunner, you mentioned Switzerland the other day. Such a poignant story about Miss Blacklock's sister. It must have been a difficult time for you both." Dora's face softened, her eyes misty. "Oh, it was, Miss Marple. Poor Charlotte, so frail, with that awful swelling on her neck. Letty was marvelous, staying with her through it all. The clinic was so grand, but it couldn't save her. Letty came back, so quiet, not herself at all." Letitia's cup clinked sharply against its saucer. "Bunny, really, we needn't revisit all that. It's ancient history." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, but she changed the subject, chatting about village life with Mrs. Easterbrook. Yet her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments: the lamp, the oil, the letter, and now Charlotte's death in Switzerland. A pattern was forming, elusive but persistent, like a melody half-remembered. As the tea party progressed, Dora Bunner grew increasingly animated, her chatter veering from childhood memories to the events of the shooting. She reached for a slice of cake, her hand trembling slightly. "It's so like our school plays, isn't it, Letty? All that drama. But that night, the lamp, I'm sure it wasn't there. I was standing right by it, and then—" She stopped, her face contorting. The cake fell from her hand, and she clutched her throat, gasping. The lamp, it wasn't there. Her eyes bulged, and she collapsed, her teacup shattering on the floor. Pandemonium erupted. Letitia knelt beside her, crying, "Bunny!" Oh God, Bunny! Colonel Easterbrook barked for a doctor, while Mrs. Easterbrook screamed, her hat tumbling off. Miss Hinchcliffe, practical as ever, checked Dora's pulse, her face grim. "She's gone," she said flatly. No pulse. Bunch Harmon, tears streaming, helped Letitia to a chair, while Patrick and Julia stood frozen, their faces pale. Philippa, her hands shaking, backed away, whispering, "Not again." Edmund Swettenham, notebook forgotten, stared in horror. Miss Marple, calm amid the chaos, bent over Dora's body, noting the faint, bitter almond scent on her breath. "Cyanide," she murmured to herself, her mind racing. She turned to Letitia, whose grief seemed genuine, her eyes wet with tears. "Miss Blacklock, we must call the police at once." Inspector Craddock arrived within the hour, accompanied by Dr. Barnes, who confirmed the cause of death. "Cyanide in her tea," he said, his voice heavy. "Quick and deadly. Must have been added just before she drank." Craddock surveyed the room, his eyes narrowing. "This is no accident. Someone here poisoned Miss Bunner. I want everyone to stay put. Nobody leaves until I've questioned you." The guests, shaken, complied. Colonel Easterbrook blustered about "damned murderers," while Mrs. Easterbrook clung to him, sobbing. Miss Hinchcliffe, her jaw tight, muttered, "Poor Amy. She'll be lost without her." Miss Murgatroyd, trembling, nodded, unable to speak. Craddock began with Letitia, who sat by the fire, her face ashen. "Miss Blacklock, did Miss Bunner have any enemies? Anything she said recently that might have made her a target?" Letitia shook her head, her voice breaking. "Bunny? Enemies? She was harmless, Inspector. A bit scatterbrained, but kind to a fault. She kept talking about the lamp, though, insisting it was moved that night. I told her she was mistaken." Craddock's eyes sharpened. "The lamp again. Miss Murgatroyd mentioned it too. Did anyone else notice it?" Miss Murgatroyd, her voice quavering, spoke up. "I did, Inspector. It wasn't by the sofa, where it always is. I'm sure of it." Miss Hinchcliffe frowned. "I saw someone near it before the lights went out, but I couldn't tell who. It was too crowded." Craddock turned to Patrick and Julia. Patrick, his usual charm gone, shrugged. "I was by the window, tossing my coin. Didn't see any lamp business." Julia, her cigarette unlit, said coolly, "I was lighting a cigarette when the lights failed. I didn't notice anything else." Philippa, questioned next, admitted to a secret that stunned the room. "Inspector, I should have said before, I'm married or was. My husband deserted during the war, and I've kept it quiet to avoid gossip. If he's alive, I can't inherit from the Godler estate. I didn't want anyone to know." Craddock's pencil paused. "And Schurz? Did he know?" Philippa shook her head. "Number I never met him. I swear Edmund Swettenham, pale and shaken, admitted to seeing a shadow near the hall before the shooting, but couldn't identify it. It was too dark, Inspector. I thought it was just someone moving to get a drink." Miss Marple, observing from her chair, spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "Inspector, Miss Bunner's last words were about the lamp. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a case where a misplaced object pointed to a deliberate act. Someone wanted her silenced, perhaps because she saw something that night, something about the lamp or the fuse." Craddock, increasingly respectful of the old lady's insight, nodded. "You're suggesting she knew too much?" "Precisely," said Miss Marple. And cyanide is quick. Someone in this room had access to her cup. Look to the tea tray, Inspector, and the timing. Craddock ordered the tray and cups preserved for analysis, his mind racing. The tea had been poured by Mitzi, but anyone could have slipped cyanide into Dora's cup during the bustle. He questioned Mitzi, who erupted into hysterics. "I poison nobody. I make tea, good tea. Someone else does this, someone who hates us all." As the guests were dismissed, Craddock lingered, speaking quietly to Miss Marple. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. Any thoughts on who might have had cyanide?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "It's not uncommon, Inspector. Gardeners use it for pests, and old medical kits sometimes contain it. But it requires intent. Someone here is playing a very dangerous game, and Dora Bunner paid the price." That night, Little Paddocks was a house of shadows. Letitia sat alone in the drawing room, staring at the fire, her grief for Dora raw and unguarded. Patrick and Julia, subdued, retired early, their usual banter silenced. Mitzi locked herself in the kitchen, refusing to emerge. Outside, the Constable Craddock had posted stood watch, his lantern a faint glow in the darkness. Miss Marple, back at the vicarage, sat with Bunch, her knitting idle. "It's a sad business, Bunch," she said. "Dora Bunner was a loose end, her memories too close to a truth someone wants hidden. The lamp, the Switzerland story. It's all connected. I must look into Charlotte Blacklock's death. There's a secret there, I'm sure." Bunch stared, aghast. "Aunt Jane, you don't think Letty—" "I think," said Miss Marple gently, "that we must follow the threads, no matter where they lead. Human nature, my dear, is a tangled thing, and Chipping Cleghorn is no exception." Chapter 8. Threads Unravel. The death of Dora Bunner cast a pall over Chipping Cleghorn, as if the village itself mourned the loss of her gentle, if scatterbrained presence. The October sky hung low and gray, mirroring the somber mood that settled over the cottages and lanes. The Bluebird Cafe, usually alive with chatter, was subdued, its patrons speaking in hushed tones about the cyanide-laced tea and the mounting sense of danger at Little Paddocks. The Gazette's announcement of a murder, once a curious novelty, now seemed a grim harbinger, and the villagers' glances were wary, as if each suspected the other of harboring a deadly secret. The question was no longer whether someone meant harm, but who, and how far they would go. At Little Paddocks, the household was a shadow of its former self. Letitia Blacklock, her face drawn with grief, moved through the morning's tasks with mechanical precision, arranging flowers in the hall and answering letters with a steady hand. Yet her eyes, red-rimmed from sleepless nights, betrayed her sorrow. Dora Bunner had been more than a companion. She was a link to a past Letitia rarely spoke of, and her loss left a void that echoed through the house. Patrick and Julia Simmons, subdued by the tragedy, kept to their rooms, their usual banter silenced. Mitzi, the volatile cook, was quieter too, though her mutterings about curses and flight to London persisted, muffled now by fear. Inspector Craddock, his lean frame taut with determination, arrived at Little Paddocks shortly after breakfast, accompanied by Sergeant Fletcher. The tea tray from the fatal party had been sent for analysis, and preliminary results confirmed cyanide in Dora's cup. A deliberate act, not a mishap. Craddock's sharp eyes scanned the drawing room, now stripped of its festive air, the chalk outline of Dora's collapse a grim reminder on the floor. "Miss Blacklock," he said, his tone measured but firm. "Miss Bunner's death changes everything. She was targeted, and I believe it's because she knew something. About the lamp, perhaps, or something deeper. Can you think of anything she said recently that might explain it? Letitia, seated by the fire, clasped her hands tightly. Bunny was always talking. Inspector. Old memories, school days, nonsense about lamps. She was confused, especially lately. I can't imagine what she could have known to make someone do this. Her voice broke, but she steadied herself, meeting his gaze. Craddock nodded, unconvinced. She mentioned Switzerland often, your sister Charlotte's death. Could there be a connection? Letitia's lips tightened. Charlotte died years ago, Inspector. 1942, in a clinic in Bern. A thyroid condition, untreatable. I was with her. It was tragic, but hardly relevant now. Craddock made a note, his mind turning over Dora's last words. The lamp, it wasn't there. He pressed further. And the pearls in Scherz's notebook. You mentioned they might be part of the Godler estate. Any chance Dora knew their whereabouts? Letitia hesitated, then shook her head. If she did, she never said. Randall Godler was secretive about his valuables, hid them during the war. I've never found them, and Bunny wouldn't have known either. She wasn't practical about such things. Craddock left the question hanging, turning to the rest of the household. Patrick, slouching in the hall, admitted to being near the window during the tea party, tossing his coin as usual. Didn't see a thing, Inspector. I was joking with Jew when Bunny collapsed. Ghastly business. Julia, cool and composed, confirmed she was by the bookcase, chatting with Philippa Hames. I didn't notice the tea tray, she said, her eyes narrowing, but someone must have been quick to slip something in. Mitzi, when questioned, was a whirlwind of indignation. I pour tea, I serve cake, I do my work. No poison in my kitchen. Someone else, they do this. Someone wicked. Craddock dismissed her, noting her fear was genuine, but her knowledge limited. In the village, Miss Jane Marple pursued her own inquiries, her frail figure a familiar sight as she walked the lanes, knitting bag in hand. At the post office, Mrs. Mop shared a tidbit. Dora had posted a letter the day before her death, addressed to a solicitor in London. Looked ever so upset, she did, said Mrs. Mop, muttering about things not being right. Poor soul. Miss Marple's needles clicked as she nodded. How interesting. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a woman who wrote a letter just before a tragedy. It revealed more than she intended. Did you see the address? Mrs. Mop shook her head. No, miss, but it was a big firm. Something and Sons, I think. She didn't say what it was about. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on to Dias Hall, where Philippa Hames was tending the rose beds. The young widow looked up, her face guarded. Miss Marple, I didn't expect you. Is it about Dora? Miss Marple's smile was gentle. In a way, my dear, such a sad loss. You were at the tea party. Did you notice anything unusual? A movement near the tray, perhaps? Philippa's hands stilled on her pruning, shears. It was crowded, Miss Marple. I was talking to Julia, trying to keep out of the way. I didn't see the tray after Mitzi brought it in. She hesitated, then added, but Dora was agitated, kept going on about that lamp. It seemed to bother her. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. Thank you, Mrs. Hames. You've a difficult life, I imagine, raising a son alone. The Godler connection must seem a distant dream. Philippa's eyes flickered. I don't think about it. I make my own way. If you're suggesting— Not at all, said Miss Marple soothingly. I only observe. In my village, secrets often hide behind the simplest lives. At the Boulders, Miss Hinchcliffe was feeding her pigs, her face set in a scowl. Miss Murgatroyd, red-eyed from crying, greeted Miss Marple with a trembling smile. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's awful about Dora. She was so kind, always chatting about old times. Hinch says it's murder, plain and simple." Miss Hinchcliffe joined them, wiping her hands on her breeches. "Damned right it is. Someone wanted her quiet. She kept harping on that lamp, said it wasn't by the sofa the night of the shooting. I saw someone near it too, but couldn't make out who. Too many people milling about." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "A lamp can be significant, Miss Hinchcliffe. In St. Mary Mead, a misplaced chair once pointed to a very clever trick. Did you notice anyone near the fuse box that night?" Miss Hinchcliffe frowned. "Thought I saw a shadow in the hall, but it was dark. Could have been anyone. Patrick, maybe, or that Swettenham boy. Amy, you were fussing with your scarf. Did you see anything?" Miss Murgatroyd shook her head. "No, Hinch. I was too nervous. But Dora, she said something odd at the tea about the lamp not being right. It was like she remembered something." Miss Marple thanked them and returned to the vicarage, her mind a whirl of connections. Dora's death was no accident. She had seen or known something that threatened the killer's plan. The lamp, the Switzerland story, the pearls. All were threads in a tapestry of deception. That afternoon, tragedy struck again. Miss Murgatroyd, alone at the Boulders while Miss Hinchcliffe was at market, decided to reenact the night of the shooting, hoping to jog her memory about the lamp. She stood in the garden, mimicking the positions of the guests, muttering to herself. The door. Someone was behind the door. Not the lamp, the door. Her eyes widened with realization, and she hurried to the telephone to call Miss Hinchcliffe. Before she could dial, a figure emerged from the shadows of the cottage, a scarf in hand. Miss Murgatroyd's cry was cut short as the scarf tightened around her throat. She struggled briefly, then slumped to the floor, lifeless. Miss Hinchcliffe returned an hour later, her shout of anguish echoing through the village as she found her friend's body. "Amy! Oh, God! Amy!" She knelt beside her, tears streaming, her usual stoicism shattered. The police were summoned, and Craddock arrived to find the scene secured by a shaken constable. The cause of death was clear: strangulation, swift and brutal. Craddock questioned Miss Hinchcliffe, who was barely coherent through her grief. "She was alone, Inspector. I should have been here. She said she wanted to think about that night, something about the door. Damn it, why didn't I stay?" Craddock's jaw tightened. "The door? Did she say anything else?" Miss Hinchcliffe shook her head, her voice hoarse. "No, just that she'd remembered something. I told her not to fuss, but she was sure it mattered." Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple heard the news from Bunch, who had rushed from the village shop, her face pale. "Aunt Jane, it's awful. Amy Murgatroyd, strangled, at the Boulders this afternoon. What's happening to us?" Miss Marple set down her knitting, her expression grave. "It's a pattern, Bunch. First Dora, now Amy. Both saw something that night, something about the lamp or the door. The killer is tying up loose ends. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a case where witnesses were silenced one by one. We must act quickly." She visited Craddock at the police station, her frail figure incongruous among the bustle of officers. "Inspector," she said, her voice steady, "Miss Murgatroyd's death confirms it. The lamp and the door are key. Someone in that room manipulated the scene, moved the lamp, tampered with the fuse, to create confusion. Dora and Amy saw it, or part of it, and paid with their lives. Craddock leaned forward, his respect for the old lady growing. "You're saying it's all staged? Sherds, the shooting, the poison, now this?" Miss Marple nodded. "Precisely. Schertz was a pawn, hired to create a spectacle. The real target is Miss Blacklock, or rather, her fortune. But the killer miscalculated. Dora's memories of Switzerland, Amy's observation about the door, they were threats. Look to the Godler will, Inspector, and those who stand to gain." Craddock showed her Scherz's notebook, the entries stark in black ink. "LB, neck, clinic. Any thoughts?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Neck could mean the graze, or a physical trait, like a scar. Clinic suggests Switzerland, and LB, Letitia Blacklock, or perhaps another name. Have you checked the clinic records from Bern?" Craddock admitted he hadn't. "It's a long shot, Miss Marple. The war made records spotty." "Try," she urged. "In my village, a single document once unraveled a great deception. And the pearls, check the house. Hidden jewels often hold the key." That evening, Craddock returned to Little Paddocks, his mind heavy with questions. He searched the attic, prompted by Miss Marple's suggestion, and found a locked box under a floorboard. Inside were papers, but no pearls. Only a note from Randall, Godler, detailing a safe deposit box in London. "For Letitia, upon Belle's death," it read. Craddock's pulse quickened. The pearls were real, and someone knew it. He confronted Letitia, who seemed genuinely surprised. "I knew of the jewels, Inspector, but not their location. Randall was always secretive. If Scherds was after them, he was mistaken. I don't have them." Craddock left, his suspicions deepening. Letitia's grief was real, but her calm was too perfect, her answers too pat. He resolved to contact the Swiss clinic, though the trail was decades old. At the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with Bunch, her knitting a slow rhythm. "It's coming together, Bunch," she said. "The lamp, the door, the clinic, they point to a lie, one buried in the past. Charlotte Blacklock's death is the heart of it. I've seen such things before. A sister, a secret, a switch. We must watch closely, for the killer is desperate now." Bunch shivered. "Aunt Jane, you make it sound so close. Who could it be?" Miss Marple's eyes were distant. "Someone who knows too much and fears being known. Human nature, my dear, is a mirror, and Chipping Cleghorn reflects it all too clearly." Chapter 9. The web tightens. The village of Chipping Cleghorn awoke to a morning heavy with foreboding, the air sharp with the bite of late October. The deaths of Dora Bunner and Amy Murgatroyd had transformed the once quiet hamlet into a place of whispered fears and sidelong glances. The Gazette's grim prophecy of murder had come to pass not once, but thrice, counting Rudy Scherz, and the villagers now moved cautiously, as if treading on thin ice. The post office, the bakery, and the churchyard buzzed with subdued speculation, each conversation circling back to Little Paddocks and the unseen hand weaving a deadly web. The question was no longer who might be next, but when and how to stop it. At Little Paddocks, Letitia Blacklock faced the day with a resolve that seemed to falter under the weight of loss. The house, once a haven of warmth, felt hollow without Dora's chatter or the bustling presence of guests. Letitia sat in the morning room, sorting through condolence cards, her bandaged ear a stark reminder of her own narrow escape. Patrick and Julia Simmons, usually lively, were subdued, their voices low as they discussed the tragedies in the drawing room. Mitzi, though still in residence, moved like a ghost, her usual theatrics muted by fear. "I stay only for you, Miss Blacklock," she muttered, setting out breakfast with trembling hands. "But this house, it is marked by death." Letitia's voice was steady, though her eyes were shadowed. "Nonsense, Mitzi. We'll get through this. The police are watching, and we mustn't give in to panic." But as she spoke, her gaze drifted to the garden, where the laurels stood sentinel, their leaves glinting darkly in the morning light. Inspector Craddock, his lean face etched with determination, arrived at little Paddock's mid-morning, his notebook filled with questions that grew more urgent with each death. The discovery of Randall Godler's note about a safe deposit box had sharpened his focus, but the Swiss clinic records remained elusive, delayed by wartime disruptions. He sat with Letitia in the drawing room, the chalk outlines of past tragedies now scrubbed away, though their memory lingered. "Miss Blacklock," he said, his tone clipped. "Miss Murgatroyd's last words were about the door, someone behind it the night of the shooting. Any idea what she meant?" Letitia frowned, her fingers smoothing the edge of a condolence card. "Behind the door?" Amy was fanciful, Inspector, like Bunny. The room was chaos, darkness, shouting, shots. She might have imagined it. "I was by the fireplace, trying to calm everyone." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "And the lamp?" Both she and Miss Bunner insisted it was moved. Could someone have rearranged the room to confuse things? Letitia's expression was unreadable. "I told you, Inspector, the lamp was where it always is. They were mistaken, upset by the shock, no doubt." Craddock pressed further, producing Scherz's notebook. "LB-neck-clinic. You say you don't know about the pearls, but clinic points to Switzerland. Could Scherz have known something about your sister's death?" Letitia's hand tightened on the card, but her voice remained calm. "Charlotte died of a goiter, Inspector. Scherz was a hotel clerk, not a doctor. If he knew anything, it was likely gossip he twisted for blackmail. I can't imagine what." Craddock left the question unanswered, turning to the rest of the household. Patrick, lounging in the hall, was evasive. "Behind the door? Didn't see a thing, Inspector. I was by the window, dodging bullets." Julia, her cigarette smoke curling lazily, claimed she was too busy lighting up to notice anything. "It was pitch black, Inspector. I barely saw my own hand." Mitzi, when questioned, erupted into a fresh tirade. "I see nothing. I am in kitchen, fixing fuses. Someone wants us all dead. First the gun, then poison, now strangling. I go to London soon." Craddock dismissed her, noting her terror but no new insights. In the village, Miss Jane Marple continued her quiet investigations, her frail figure a deceptive cloak for her razor-sharp mind. She visited the church, where the vicar, Julian Harmon, was polishing the brass lectern, his face troubled. "Miss Marple, it's a dark time for chipping Cleghorn. First Dora, now Amy. I fear for Letty. Bunch says you've a knack for these things. Any ideas?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly in her bag. "Ideas, Mr. Harmon, come from observation. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a case where a series of accidents hid a calculated plan. The door, the lamp, the clinic, all suggest a truth buried in the past. Tell me, do you know anything of Miss Blacklock's time in Switzerland?" Julian shook his head. "Only what Bunch has heard, that she nursed her sister there during the war. A sad story, but Letty's always been private about it." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to Dora's letter to the solicitor, mentioned by Mrs. Mop. She made her way to the Swettenham house, a neat Victorian villa where Edmund Swettenham lived with his formidable mother, Mrs. Swettenham. The widow, a woman of sharp tongue and sharper opinions, welcomed Miss Marple with a cup of weak tea and a barrage of complaints. "This village is going to the dogs, Miss Marple. Murders, poison, strangling. What next? I told Edmund to stay away from little paddocks, but he's always scribbling in that notebook, thinking he's Agatha Christie." Edmund, overhearing, flushed. "Mother, please. Miss Marple, I'm trying to help. I was at the tea party, saw nothing odd, but Amy's talk about the door stuck with me. I think she meant someone was hiding there, watching." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Hiding, you say? That's most interesting. In my village, a hidden observer once changed the course of a crime. Did you know anything of Dora's letter to a solicitor?" Mrs. Swettenham's eyes widened. "A letter? Dora? She never said a word to me, and we were on the fate committee together. What was it about?" "I'm not sure," said Miss Marple gently, "but it may hold a clue. Thank you, Edmund, for your observation." Her next stop was Dias Hall, where Philippa Hames was raking leaves, her face pale but composed. "Miss Marple," she said, pausing, "I suppose you're here about Amy. It's horrible. First Dora, now her. I don't know what to think." Miss Marple's smile was kind, but probing. "It's a terrible business, Mrs. Hames. You mentioned your husband's desertion at the tea party. Brave of you to share. Did Dora or Amy ever speak of the Godler will in your presence?" Philippa shook her head, her eyes guarded. "No, never. I told the inspector. I don't care about the inheritance. My son's my priority. I was by the bookcase when Dora collapsed. Didn't see anything near the tea tray." Miss Marple nodded, noting the defensiveness. "Of course, but small things matter, my dear. Amy's talk of the door. Did you notice anything that night?" Philippa hesitated. "It was too dark, Miss Marple. I was in the corner, out of the way. But Amy seemed certain about something. She kept muttering about positions." Miss Marple thanked her and returned to the vicarage, where Bunch was preparing lunch, her face anxious. "Aunt Jane, it's getting worse. Amy's strangled. Julian says the parish is terrified. What's going on?" Miss Marple set down her knitting bag, her expression grave. "It's a desperate mind at work, Bunch. Dora and Amy were silenced because they saw something. Dora with her memories, Amy with her observation about the door. It's like a case in St. Mary Mead, where a hidden truth unraveled through a single slip. I believe the key lies in Switzerland, with Charlotte Blacklock's death." Bunch's eyes widened. "Charlotte? But she died years ago." "So we're told," said Miss Marple softly. "But stories, my dear, can be rewritten." That afternoon, a third attempt on Letitia's life sent shockwaves through the village. As she walked along the lane to the shop, a shot rang out from the hedgerow, the bullet whistling past her shoulder. She stumbled, but was unharmed, saved by a sudden gust that rustled the leaves, alerting her to duck. A passer-by, the baker's boy, saw a figure in a dark coat flee into the woods, but the mist swallowed them before pursuit was possible. Craddock, summoned to the scene, found Letitia shaken but defiant. "It was a crack shot, Inspector, but a poor one. I'm not so easy to kill." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she adjusted her scarf. Craddock's jaw tightened. "This is no prank, Miss Blacklock. You're to stay indoors, with a constable at all times. Whoever's behind this is getting bolder." He gathered the witnesses from the tea party at Little Paddocks, hoping to jog their memories. Colonel Easterbrook blustered about cowardly snipers, while Mrs. Easterbrook clutched her shawl, murmuring about curses. Miss Hinchcliffe, her eyes red from grief, was blunt. "It's someone close, Inspector. Amy said the door. She saw someone there, hiding. I should have listened." Patrick and Julia, questioned again, stuck to their stories, though Julia's coolness seemed strained. "I was by the bookcase, Inspector. I didn't see any door business." Patrick, unusually serious, admitted, "I might have been near the hall, but it was too dark to tell." Philippa, her face pale, repeated her account of standing by the bookcase, while Edmund Swettenham, his notebook now a fixture, said he'd seen a shadow but couldn't swear to its identity. "It's like a novel, Inspector, but a grim one." Miss Marple, invited to the gathering at Craddock's request, sat quietly, her knitting a soft rhythm. When asked, she spoke, her voice mild but piercing. "Inspector, the door and the lamp are not accidents. Someone orchestrated that night to create confusion, to make Shers's death seem a bungled robbery. Dora and Amy saw through the illusion, Dora with her talk of the past, Amy with her memory of the door. And Switzerland, there's a lie there, I'm certain." Craddock leaned forward, intrigued. "A lie? You mean about Charlotte Blacklock?" Miss Marple nodded. "In St. Mary Mead, I knew a woman who assumed her sister's identity for love. Or money. Charlotte's goiter, her death in a clinic. It's too neat. Shers's note, neck, clinic, suggests he knew something. Perhaps he worked at that clinic or heard a rumor. Check the records, Inspector, and look for scars." Craddock's eyes widened. "Scars? You think Miss Blacklock?" "I think," said Miss Marple, "that we must consider all possibilities. Human nature is complex and greed is a powerful motive." That evening, Craddock sent a telegram to a contact in Bern, requesting any surviving records from the clinic where Charlotte Blacklock died. He also searched Little Paddock's attic again, finding a faded photograph of two young women, one with a high-necked dress, concealing what might be a goiter. The caption read, "Letitia and Charlotte, 1939. Letitia's face was clear, but Charlotte's neck was hidden, her smile shy. At the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with Bunch, her knitting idle. "It's closing in, Bunch," she said. "The killer is desperate, striking at anyone who threatens their secret. Charlotte's death is the key, a sister, a clinic, a hidden truth. I've seen such things before, in St. Mary Mead, where a lie grew into murder." Bunch shivered. "Aunt Jane, you're scaring me. Who could it be?" Miss Marple's eyes were distant. "Someone who fears exposure, my dear. The web is tightening, and the truth will soon break free." Chapter 10. Revelation at Little Paddocks. The late October gloom settled over Chipping Cleghorn like a shroud, the village's once cheerful lanes now heavy with an oppressive silence. The murders of Dora Bunner and Amy Murgatroyd, coupled with the shooting of Rudy Shers and the repeated attempts on Letitia Blacklock's life, had woven a tapestry of fear that stifled the usual bustle of village life. The postmistress, the baker, and even the children playing by the duck pond spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward Little Paddocks, where the heart of the mystery pulsed. The Gazette's announcement, now a grim prophecy fulfilled thrice over, lingered in every mind, and the question was no longer who was behind it, but whether the killer could be stopped before another tragedy struck. At Little Paddocks, the house seemed to hold its breath. Letitia Blacklock, her face pale but resolute, had insisted on hosting a final gathering, a defiant gesture against the shadow of death. The drawing room, scene of so much horror, was arranged with meticulous care. The silver tea service gleamed. Plates of sandwiches and Mitzi's delicate pastries lined the table, and a fire roared in the grate, casting a warm glow that belied the chill of fear. Yet the atmosphere was taut, the memory of Dora's collapse and Amy's strangulation haunting every corner. Letitia, her bandaged ear hidden by a silk scarf, greeted her guests with a calm that bordered on defiance, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor as she poured tea. Inspector Craddock, his lean frame tense with the weight of the case, had agreed to the gathering, sensing it might flush out the truth. He stood by the French windows, now bolted tight, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Sergeant Fletcher, notebook in hand, hovered near the door, ready to record every word. The guests arrived with reluctance, their faces etched with unease. Colonel and Mrs. Easterbrook, the colonel's bluster muted, his wife's hat subdued. Miss Hinchcliffe, alone and grim-faced, her grief for Amy raw. Philippa Hames, quiet and watchful, her gardening gloves tucked into her pocket. Edmund Swettenham, his notebook clutched like a talisman, and Patrick and Julia Simmons, their usual levity replaced by strained silence. Bunch Harmon arrived with Miss Jane Marple, whose frail figure and mild gaze concealed a mind as sharp as a blade. "Miss Blacklock," said Miss Marple, settling into a chair with her knitting bag, "you're most courageous to bring us together again. It reminds me of a gathering in St. Mary Mead, where a final confrontation revealed a hidden truth. The air tonight feels much the same." Letitia's smile was tight. "I hope for less drama, Miss Marple, but we can't live in fear forever. Tea, everyone?" The guests murmured assent, though their appetites were scant. Colonel Easterbrook cleared his throat, attempting to lighten the mood. "Damned odd business, Blacklock. In my day, we'd have rooted out the culprit with a court-martial. But this, poison, strangling, it's cowardly." Mrs. Easterbrook shivered, clutching her teacup. "Oh, Archie, don't. Poor Dora, poor Amy. I can't bear to think who's next. Letty, you're sure it's safe here?" Letitia's voice was steady. "As safe as anywhere, Laura. The police are here, and we're all together. Let's try to enjoy the evening." Miss Hinchcliffe, her eyes red-rimmed, snorted. "Enjoy? With a killer among us? Amy saw something that night, someone behind the door. I should have listened. Now she's gone, and I'm not letting it rest." Patrick, lounging by the window, tried to ease the tension. "Come now, Hinch, we're all shaken, but maybe it's simpler. Sherds was a crook, got in over his head, and someone's just stirring the pot with these threats." Julia, lighting a cigarette, shot him a look. "Stirring the pot? Pat, don't be dense. Dora and Amy weren't killed for nothing. Someone's desperate, and it's about the money. Always is." Philippa, silent until now, spoke softly. "I told the inspector. I don't care about the Godler fortune. My son's my life. But whoever's doing this, they're not stopping." Edmund Swettenham, scribbling in his notebook, looked up. "It's like a story, isn't it? But real. I keep thinking about Amy's words, the door. Someone was there, watching, maybe planning." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes moving from face to face. She noted Letitia's controlled composure, Patrick's forced levity, Julia's sharp glances, Philippa's quiet intensity, and Miss Hinchcliffe's barely contained anger. The room was a chessboard, each piece poised for a move, and she sensed the game was nearing its end. Craddock, sensing the moment, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to find answers. 3 people are dead. Rudy Schurz, Dora Bunner, Amy Murgatroyd. Miss Blacklock has been targeted repeatedly. This isn't random. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying. Let's start with the night of the shooting. Miss Murgatroyd said someone was behind the door. Who was it? Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Colonel Easterbrook frowned. Behind the door? I was by the fire, trying to keep Laura calm. Didn't see anyone there. Mrs. Easterbrook nodded, her hat bobbing. I was too frightened to notice anything but the gun. Miss Hinchcliffe's voice was low, almost a growl. I was by the sofa, holding Amy's arm. She kept saying the lamp was wrong, and then the door. Someone was there. I'm sure of it now. Patrick shrugged, his coin flipping idly in his hand. I was by the window, as always. Didn't see any door business. Julia, exhaling smoke, added, I was lighting my cigarette. Too dark to see much else. Philippa's voice was quiet. I was by the bookcase, Inspector. I didn't see the door, but Amy was certain, kept muttering about it later. Edmund hesitated, then spoke. I was near the hall, I think. Saw a shadow, but I thought it was someone getting a drink. It was too quick. Miss Marple, her knitting paused, spoke softly. Inspector, may I suggest something? In St. Mary Mead, I once unraveled a mystery by reconstructing the scene. Let us do so now. Place everyone where they were that night and see what emerges. Craddock, intrigued by the old lady's persistence, agreed. Very well, everyone, take your positions as they were before the lights went out. The guests complied, moving with reluctance. Letitia stood by the fireplace, her scarf adjusted carefully. Patrick lounged by the window, coin in hand. Julia positioned herself by the bookcase, miming a cigarette. Philippa retreated to her corner, her face pale. Edmund stood near the hall, notebook clutched. Miss Hinchcliffe took the sofa, her jaw tight, while Mrs. Easterbrook clung to the colonel near the fire. Sergeant Fletcher stood by the door, watching closely. Miss Marple rose, her voice clear. Now, let us imagine the lights go out. The French windows open, Schurz enters, shots are fired. Miss Blacklock is grazed, Schurz falls dead. But Amy Murgatroyd said someone was behind the door, not the French windows, the hall door. And the lamp was moved, creating darkness. Why? She turned to Letitia, her eyes gentle but piercing. Miss Blacklock, you've played a clever game. You orchestrated this, didn't you? Not as Letitia, but as Charlotte Blacklock, who assumed her sister's identity after Letitia's death in Switzerland. The room froze, all eyes on Letitia. Her face paled, but she laughed, a brittle sound. Miss Marple, you're fanciful. I'm Letitia, Blacklock. Everyone knows that. Charlotte died in 1942. Of a goiter. I nursed her. Miss Marple's voice was steady. Did you? In St. Mary Mead, I knew a woman who swapped places with her sister for a legacy. Charlotte had a goiter, yes, but surgery was possible, wasn't it? You had it removed, hid the scar with chokers, and took Letitia's name to claim the Godler fortune. Rudy Schurz, a clerk at the clinic, recognized you years later at the Royale Hotel. He blackmailed you, so you hired him to stage the shooting, planning to kill him and claim self-defense. The graze was self-inflicted, wasn't it? To sell the story. Letitia's composure cracked, her hands trembling. This is absurd. I'm Letitia. Bunny knew me, she'd have said. Bunny did say, Miss Marple replied. Her memories of Switzerland, her slips about your change, they were clues. She wrote to a solicitor, questioning. That's why you poisoned her. Amy saw you by the door, adjusting the fuse. She had to be silenced, too. Craddock stepped forward, his voice sharp. Miss Blacklock, or whoever you are, explain yourself." Letitia, Charlotte, stood, her face a mask of defiance that crumbled into despair. "I only wanted what was mine," she whispered. "Letitia died in Bern, pneumonia, not the goiter. I was Charlotte, disfigured, shunned. I took her name to escape the shame, to live the life I deserved. The fortune was for Letitia, but I was her sister. Why shouldn't I have it? Schurz knew me from the clinic, demanded money. I paid him to stage the robbery, to make it look like I was the victim. I shot him, grazed myself. It was perfect. But Bunny started remembering. Old photos, my scar. She wrote to the solicitor, questioning. I couldn't let her ruin it. "And Amy?" Craddock pressed. Charlotte's voice broke. "She saw me by the door, adjusting the fuse. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Bunny's tea, Amy's scarf. It was to protect my life here." Miss Hinchcliffe's eyes blazed. "You killed Amy, you monster, for money." Charlotte sank into a chair, tears streaming. "I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted to be Letitia, to be free." Craddock signaled to Fletcher. "Take her into custody. We'll verify the clinic records, but this confession's enough for now." The room erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Easterbrook gasped, her hat falling. Colonel Easterbrook muttered about damned deceit. Philippa, her face soft with relief, whispered, "It's over." Patrick and Julia exchanged stunned glances, their suspicions of each other forgotten. Edmund scribbled furiously, his novel taking shape. Miss Marple, her knitting resumed, spoke softly to Bunch. "It's a sad thing, my dear, when greed twists a soul. Charlotte wanted a new life, but she built it on lies. In St. Mary Mead, I saw such a case, a woman who hid her past only to be undone by it." Craddock approached, his respect evident. "Miss Marple, you've a gift. How did you know?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Human nature, Inspector. It's the same in every village. Charlotte's scar, Dora's memories, Amy's door. They were threads, and threads always lead somewhere. As Charlotte was led away, the firelight flickered, casting long shadows. Little Paddocks, for now, was quiet, but the echoes of its secrets lingered, a reminder of the fragility of truth." Chapter 11. Loose Ends. The air in Chipping Cleghorn seemed to lighten as the news of Charlotte Blacklock's confession spread through the village, like a fog lifting to reveal the familiar contours of its lanes and cottages. The grim sequence of events, the shooting of Rudy Schurz, the poisoning of Dora Bunner, the strangulation of Amy Murgatroyd, and the repeated attempts on the woman everyone had known as Letitia Blacklock, had left the community shaken, but the unmasking of Charlotte as the orchestrator of these crimes brought a cautious relief. The Gazette's prophecy of murder had been fulfilled, and its architect was now in custody, her web of deception unraveled. Yet, as the villagers resumed their routines, a sense of unease lingered, for the truth, though exposed, had left threads dangling, questions unanswered, lives altered, and secrets still half-buried. At Little Paddocks, the house stood quiet, its once welcoming rooms now heavy with the weight of betrayal. The drawing-room, scene of so much tragedy, was tidied but subdued, the silver tea service packed away, the fire unlit. Letitia, Charlotte, had been taken to Milchester, where Inspector Craddock was compiling evidence to confirm her identity and crimes. The household felt hollow. Mitzi, though still muttering about curses, prepared meals with mechanical efficiency. Patrick and Julia Simmons, their holiday-turned-nightmare, packed their bags, their usual banter replaced by somber reflection. The village, too, was subdued, its gossip tempered by sorrow for Dora and Amy, and a lingering wariness about what else might lurk beneath its placid surface. Inspector Craddock, his lean frame less tense but still alert, spent the morning at the police station, sifting through the final pieces of the puzzle. A telegram from Byrne had arrived, patchy but revealing. Records from the clinic confirmed Charlotte Blacklock's surgery for a goiter in 1941, and a note mentioned her sister Letitia's death from pneumonia in 1942. The clinic's staff list included a young Rudy Schurz, a porter at the time, who might have recognized Charlotte years later at the Royal Hotel. The safe deposit box in London, mentioned in Randall Godler's note, had been opened, revealing a string of pearls and a letter confirming the inheritance for Letitia, or her impersonator. Craddock's jaw tightened as he read. Charlotte's scheme had been meticulous, but her desperation had undone her. He visited little paddocks to tie up loose ends, sitting in the morning room with a cup of tea served by a subdued Mitzi. Miss Blacklock, or rather Charlotte, has confessed to everything, he told the remaining household. Schurz's blackmail, the staged shooting, the murders of Dora Bunner and Amy Murgatroyd. But I need to confirm a few details. Patrick, Julia, your alibis for the night of the shooting and the tea party. Any discrepancies? Patrick, his usual grin absent, leaned against the wall. I've told you, Inspector, by the window both times, tossing my coin. Didn't see a thing. Wish I had. Might have saved Dora or Amy. Julia, her cigarette unlit, nodded. I was by the bookcase, as I said, lighting a cigarette during the shooting, talking to Philippa at the tea. I didn't notice the tea tray or the door. It's all a blur. Craddock's eyes lingered on her. The barmaid's report of a blonde woman with Schurz still nagged at him, but Julia's denial was firm, and no evidence linked her directly. He turned to Mitzi, who hovered in the doorway. You were in the kitchen both times, you said? Anyone near the fuse box before the shooting? Mitzi's eyes widened, her voice shrill. I tell you, I fix fuses, I cook, I see nothing. No one comes to kitchen but me. This house, it is bad luck, but I do not kill. Craddock dismissed her gently, his suspicions eased. Mitzi's fear was genuine, and her role seemed peripheral. He left little paddocks, his notebook heavier, but his mind clearer. The case was solid, but he wanted one final piece. Confirmation of the pearl's location. In the village, Miss Jane Marple continued her quiet rounds, her knitting bag a constant companion. She stopped at the Bluebird Cafe, where Mrs. Easterbrook, her hat more flamboyant now that the danger had passed, was holding court. It's shocking, Miss Marple, she said, her voice carrying. Letty, Charlotte, I mean, a murderer. All for money. Archie says it's what comes of greed, but I never suspected her. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. Greed is a powerful force, Mrs. Easterbrook. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a woman who went to great lengths for a legacy. But the truth always finds a way. Tell me, did you ever notice anything odd about Miss Blacklock? Her manner, perhaps, or her appearance? Mrs. Easterbrook frowned, her feathers bobbing. Well, she always wore those high-necked dresses or scarves, even in summer. I thought it was just her style. Old-fashioned, you know. But now, with this scar business, oh, it's chilling. Colonel Easterbrook, joining them, nodded. Damned clever, hiding in plain sight. I saw Schurz near Dias Hall, you know. Should have reported it sooner. Might have stopped this mess. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Hindsight is a great teacher, Colonel, but you helped by noticing him. Every detail matters. Her next stop was the boulders, where Miss Hinchcliffe sat alone, her face etched with grief. The loss of Amy Murgatroyd had left her unmoored, her usual vigor dulled. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice rough, "you were right about the door. Amy saw Charlotte there, didn't she? I should have listened, kept her safe." Miss Marple's hand rested briefly on hers. "You couldn't have known, my dear. In my village, I saw a friend blame herself for a similar tragedy, but guilt helps no one. Amy's observation helped catch a killer. You must hold to that." Miss Hinchcliffe nodded, her jaw tight. "I'll manage. The pigs need me, and Amy wouldn't want me moping. But Charlotte, she fooled us all." Miss Marple's eyes were kind but piercing. "She fooled herself most of all, Miss Hinchcliffe. A lie, even a perfect one, is a heavy burden." At Dias Hall, Philippa Hames was pruning roses, her movement steady despite the strain of recent days. Miss Marple approached, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Hames, you've been through a great deal. The Godler fortune is yours now, I understand, with Charlotte's deception exposed. How do you feel?" Philippa's hands stilled, her eyes distant. "Relieved, I suppose, but it's bittersweet. I never wanted the money, not like this. My son's future is what matters. I've had a letter from my husband. He's alive, wants to reconcile. I don't know if I can, but I'll try, for Harry's sake." Miss Marple nodded, noting the quiet strength. "A wise choice, my dear. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a young woman who rebuilt her life after loss. You're stronger than you know." Philippa smiled faintly. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You've a way of making things clearer." Back at the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with Bunch, recounting the day's conversations. "The threads are tied, Bunch, but not all. Charlotte's confession explains much, but the pearls, where are they? And Dora's letter to the solicitor, what did it say? These are the loose ends that nag at me." Bunch frowned, setting down her teapot. "Aunt Jane, you think there's more? Charlotte admitted everything. Sherds, Dora, Amy. What else could there be?" Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. "In St. Mary Mead, I once thought a case was closed, only to find a final twist. The pearls are key. Randall Godler hid them for a reason. And Dora's letter, it may confirm Charlotte's story or reveal another layer." Craddock, meanwhile, had tracked down the solicitor in London, a firm called Withers and Sons. Dora's letter, retrieved from their files, was brief but telling. "I am troubled about Letty. Things she says about Switzerland don't add up. Her scar, the clinic. Could you check the records? I fear she's not herself." The solicitor had not acted on it, assuming it was the ramblings of an anxious friend, but Craddock saw its significance. Dora had suspected the truth, and it had cost her life. He returned to Little Paddocks, where Patrick and Julia were preparing to leave for London. "Inspector," Patrick said, his suitcase in hand, "we're clearing out. This place has had enough drama for a lifetime. Anything else you need from us?" Craddock shook his head. "Your alibis check out, and Charlotte's confession covers the main points. But if you remember anything about that night, any odd detail, let me know." Julia, her expression softer than usual, nodded. "We were fools, Pat and I, thinking it was just a game. Poor Dora, poor Amy. If we'd noticed something—" "You couldn't have," Craddock said firmly. "Charlotte was clever, but she misjudged her friends." The pearls, Craddock discovered, were still in the London safe deposit box, untouched since Randall Godler's death. He arranged for their transfer to Philippa Hames, now the rightful heir with Charlotte's deception exposed. Philippa, informed by letter, accepted with quiet gratitude her focus on her son's future rather than the wealth. That afternoon, Craddock visited the vicarage, seeking Miss Marple's insight one last time. "You were right, Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair. "The clinic records, Dora's letter, the pearls, it all pointed to Charlotte. How did you see it so clearly?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes twinkling. "Human nature, Inspector. It's the same in every village. Charlotte's scar, hidden by scarves, Dora's memories, slipping out despite her loyalty. Amy's glimpse of the door. They were signs of a truth struggling to surface. In St. Mary Mead, I learned to watch for such signs. People betray themselves in the smallest ways." Craddock nodded, his respect deepening. "You've a gift, Miss Marple. The pearls are with Mrs. Hames now, and Charlotte's facing trial. The case is closed, but I feel we've missed something, some final piece." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Perhaps, Inspector, but sometimes the loose ends are not in the crime, but in the lives it touched. Philippa will rebuild, Miss Hinchcliffe will endure, and the village will heal. That's the real resolution." As evening fell, Chipping Cleghorn settled into a cautious peace. At Dias Hall, Philippa met with her estranged husband, their conversation tentative but hopeful, a step toward reconciliation. At the Boulders, Miss Hinchcliffe fed her pigs, her grief for Amy tempered by a resolve to carry on. Patrick and Julia boarded a train for London, their holiday a memory they'd rather forget. Edmund Swettenham, his notebook filled with notes, began drafting a novel, determined to capture the village's drama. At Little Paddocks, Mitzi packed her bags, her decision to leave unshaken. "I go to London, find new work," she told the empty house. "No more death, no more curses." The house stood silent, its secrets laid bare, waiting for new occupants to fill its rooms with life. Miss Marple, preparing to return to St. Mary Mead, sat with Bunch in the vicarage parlor, her knitting nearly complete. "It's been a troubling visit, Bunch," she said, her voice soft. "But truth has a way of emerging, like a flower through frost. Charlotte Blacklock sought a new life, but lies are poor foundations." Bunch hugged her aunt, tears in her eyes. "You saved Letty. Well, Charlotte, I mean. And us. How do you do it, Aunt Jane?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "By watching, my dear, and listening. People are much alike, whether in St. Mary Mead or Chipping Cleghorn. Their hearts tell their stories, if you know where to look." As the sun set, casting long shadows over the village, the loose ends of the case were tied, not with a flourish, but with the quiet certainty of justice done. Chipping Cleghorn would heal, its scars fading like the mist, but the memory of its dark autumn would linger, a cautionary tale of greed and deception. Chapter 12. A Quiet Return. The late October days in Chipping Cleghorn softened into a tentative calm, as if the village, weary from its ordeal, sought solace in the familiar rhythms of autumn. The leaves fell in golden drifts, carpeting the lanes, and the duck pond reflected a sky of pale, unbroken blue. The horrors that had gripped Little Paddocks, the staged shooting of Rudy Schurz, the poisoning of Dora Bunner, the strangulation of Amy Murgatroyd, and the unmasking of Charlotte Blacklock as a murderer masquerading as her sister Letitia had left scars. But the village was resilient. The gossip at the Bluebird Cafe and the post office had shifted from fear to reflection, with villagers marveling at the deception that had unfolded in their midst. The Gazette's grim announcement of a murder, now a fulfilled prophecy, was spoken of with a mix of awe and relief, as if the storm had passed, leaving only ripples in its wake. At the vicarage, Miss Jane Marple prepared for her return to Saint. Mary Mead, her small suitcase packed with the neat precision of a woman accustomed to order. Her knitting, a pale blue shawl now complete, lay folded on the parlor table, a quiet testament to the hours spent unraveling the mystery. Bunch Harmon, her niece, fussed over her, setting out a final tea with scones and jam, her round face a mixture of gratitude and melancholy. "Aunt Jane," she said, pouring tea, "I don't know how we'd have managed without you. You saw through Charlotte's lies when we were all blind. But it's so sad. Dora, Amy, even Charlotte herself. What makes people do such things?" Miss Marple's eyes, sharp despite their mildness, softened as she took her cup. "Greed, my dear, and the weight of a hidden self. Charlotte Blacklock wanted a life free of her past, but lies are like shadows. They follow you, no matter how fast you run. In St. Mary Mead, I've seen it before. A woman who hid her true face, only to lose everything when the mask slipped. Human nature, Bunch, is a fragile thing, easily twisted by want." Bunch sighed, spreading jam on a scone. "But you untangled it. Scherz's blackmail, the lamp, the door, that clinic in Switzerland. How do you do it, Aunt Jane? You sit there knitting, and suddenly you know." Miss Marple's smile was faint, almost wistful. "By listening, my dear, and watching. People reveal themselves in the smallest ways. A word, a glance, a hesitation. Chipping Cleghorn is no different from St. Mary Mead. The heart speaks, if you know how to hear it." In the village, life was stitching itself back together. At Dias Hall, Philippa Hames, now the confirmed heir to the Godler fortune, worked in the garden, her hands steady as she planted bulbs for spring. The pearls, retrieved from the London safe deposit box, were locked away, a legacy she accepted with quiet resolve. Her estranged husband, reformed and seeking reconciliation, had visited again, and their conversations, though tentative, held promise. "I'm doing this for Harry," she told the vicar when he stopped by, her voice firm. "The money will secure his future, but I want him to know his father, too. We'll see." The vicar, Julian Harmon, nodded, his face gentle. "You're a strong woman, Philippa. The village is behind you, and Miss Marple, she spoke highly of your courage." Philippa's smile was small but genuine. "She's an extraordinary woman. She saw what none of us did." At the Boulders, Miss Hinchcliffe moved through her chores with a dogged determination, her grief for Amy Murgatroyd a constant ache. The pigs, oblivious to the tragedy, grunted contentedly as she fed them, and she found solace in their routine. Amy loved these beasts, she told a neighbor, her voice rough but steady. "I'll keep them going, for her." She had taken to visiting the churchyard daily, laying flowers on Amy's grave, her stoicism a shield against the pain. Miss Marple's words echoed in her mind. Guilt helps no one. She clung to that, a lifeline in her loss. Patrick and Julia Simmons had left for London, their suitcases packed with relief. Their holiday, meant to be a carefree escape, had become a grim lesson in deception. At the train station, Patrick had shaken Craddock's hand, his grin rueful. "Never thought I'd be in a real murder mystery, Inspector. Makes my Navy days look tame." Julia, her usual coolness softened, added, "We'll stick to city life for a while. Too much drama in the country." Edmund Swettenham, meanwhile, was deep in his novel, his notebook now a manuscript filled with the village's saga. His mother, Mrs. Swettenham, grumbled about his scribbling, but her pride was evident. "He's got a story now, hasn't he?" she told the postmistress. "All thanks to that dreadful business at Little Paddock's, but Miss Marple, she's the one who cracked it. Sharp as a tack, that old lady." Little Paddock's itself stood empty, its windows dark, its garden untended. Mitzi had departed for London, her final words a muttered vow to never work in a cursed house again. The estate was to be sold, the proceeds tied up in legal wrangling as Charlotte's trial loomed. The village speculated about new owners, but for now, the house was a silent monument to its secrets, its doors locked against the past. Inspector Craddock, his case nearly closed, spent the morning at Milchester, finalizing his report. The Burn Clinic records, though incomplete, corroborated Charlotte's confession. Letitia Blacklock had died in 1942, and Charlotte, post-surgery, had assumed her identity. Rudy Schurz, a porter at the clinic, had likely recognized her at the Royale Hotel, sparking the blackmail that led to the fatal scheme. Dora's letter to the solicitor, Amy's memory of the door, and the pearls in the safe deposit box had all pointed to the truth. Craddock marveled at the intricacy of Charlotte's plan and its ultimate failure. He visited the vicarage to bid farewell to Miss Marple, his respect for her undimmed. "You were the key, Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair with a cup of Bunch's tea. "The lamp, the door, the scar. I'd have missed them without you. How did you piece it together?" Miss Marple's needles, now working on a new project, a pink scarf for a neighbor's child, clicked softly. "It's not so different from knitting, Inspector. A dropped stitch, a wrong color, and the pattern goes awry. Charlotte's scar was her dropped stitch, hidden by scarves but betrayed by Dora's memories. Amy's glimpse of the door, Dora's letter, they were threads that didn't fit. In St. Mary Mead, I've learned to look for such mismatches. People, you see, are like patterns. They reveal their flaws if you watch closely." Craddock nodded, his notebook closed for once. "You've a rare gift. The pearls are with Philippa Hames, and Charlotte's trial is set for next month. The village can breathe again, thanks to you." Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "The village, Inspector, will heal itself. People are resilient, even after betrayal. Philippa will find her way, Miss Hinchcliffe will endure, and Chipping Cleghorn will forget its shadows in time." As Craddock left, Bunch sat with her aunt, her eyes misty. "Aunt Jane, you're going tomorrow, and I'll miss you terribly. You saved us, you know, saw what we couldn't. Will you come back?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch warm. "Of course, my dear. Chipping Cleghorn has a charm despite its troubles. But St. Mary Mead is home, and my garden needs me. Besides, there's always another puzzle, even in a quiet village." That afternoon, Miss Marple took a final walk through Chipping Cleghorn, her knitting bag swinging at her side. She paused by the churchyard, where Dora and Amy's graves were marked with fresh flowers, their simplicity a contrast to the violence of their ends. She stopped at the post office, where Mrs. Mop greeted her with a smile. "You're a hero, Miss Marple," she said, handing over a letter from St. Mary Mead. "We'll talk of you for years." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Nonsense, Mrs. Mop. I only listened as anyone might. Keep an eye on the village. It's full of stories if you know where to look." Her last stop was the station, where the train to St. Mary Mead awaited. Bunch accompanied her, carrying the suitcase, her chatter a mix of relief and sorrow. "Write to me, Aunt Jane," she said, hugging her tightly, "and tell me if you solve another mystery." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she boarded the train, her knitting bag settled beside her. "I will, Bunch, but mysteries find us, not the other way round. Take care of Julian and keep Chipping Cleghorn's heart beating." As the train pulled away, the village receded, its cottages and lanes blending into the autumn haze. Miss Marple opened her letter, a note from a friend in St. Mary Mead, hinting at a curious incident at the vicarage there. She smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. Chipping Cleghorn's secrets were laid bare, but the world was full of others, waiting for a keen eye to unravel them. Back in the village, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the duck pond. The Bluebird Cafe hummed with evening chatter, the post office closed its shutters, and the church bells rang for evensong. Chipping Cleghorn, scarred but enduring, turned toward winter, its story of greed and betrayal already fading into legend, a tale to be told over tea and scones for years to come.